Alrighty, I want to welcome everybody to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast and Google Hangout. This morning, I did have plans to do a creation science hangout with a fellow Christian by the name of Andrew, and I goofed up. I gave him the wrong day. I told him next weekend, and I was planning on doing it this weekend. So if he comes along and wants to join in, he can. Andrew, I apologize for that. We can continue, or we can do that discussion next week yet. So, but Christopher Mowdy, who has joined me on the show in the past, said that he responded to my email this morning asking if he would want to join in the discussion and do a response to, in a previous episode, we had an hour hangout, and then I had done an additional response to that dialogue in a following podcast. And so I've asked Christopher to jump in, and maybe we can briefly interact and discuss that particular discussion, and maybe take that on from there. And then we can maybe between a Christian and an atheist talk some about science and some of the philosophical assumptions that come into play when it comes to the scientific process. And we can talk about different scientific evidences also that confirm either evolution or creationism. So I'm going to go ahead and let Christopher, if you just, I believe you can just unmute yourself at this point, and you can go ahead and join right in. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. So, let's just go ahead and just kind of pick up from where we left off. I'll kind of briefly introduce, prep everybody here for what we had been discussing. Christopher and I had been discussing anthropology, basically. How do we account for consciousness, and how do we account for human morality? And Christopher had made a comment during our discussion, and actually, you know what? Instead of me paraphrasing what you said, I'll let you kind of jump in here and just go ahead and tell our audience what it was that you had said, and then what I had responded to, and then we can kind of just go from there. So go ahead, Christopher.
Well, I think the clip that you had played as the preface to the critique that you gave, it started with talking about the underpinnings of where morality comes from. And I said that I don't know. And throughout that, you kind of challenged me. You pushed me a little bit as far as, having a justification for morality, and how you have one and my worldview doesn't. And I think I threw out the phrase one man's intellectual one man's dancing around certainty about justifying moral underpinnings is another man's intellectual integrity.
Yes, you summed it up well. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. And so now I'm going to go, I took just a couple of notes. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to try to reiterate your critiques, but I want you to stop me if I get them wrong, because the last thing I want to do is have a discussion about a misunderstanding about what either of us said.
Yeah, absolutely. No, go ahead.
Cool.
Go ahead.
And so you start off by saying that you tried to demonstrate, the question that you asked in response to that, because after I said the whole one man's, intellectual integrity is another man's inability to justify, or, paraphrasing. After I said that, then you said, are you certain that you don't know? And you're using that as an example to show me that I also have certainty.
That is correct. Yeah. That is
okay.
Correct.
So the only thing that I have to say about that is I wasn't arguing against whether certainty exists, right? But from my perspective, certainty is about beliefs, right? And certainty can be swapped out with the word confidence, and that exists on a scale. I'm maximally confident about some things, minimally confident about other things, and it depends on what we're talking about as to where that lays. So, to your point, from my perspective, I am maximally certain that I don't know what the underpinnings of morality are. But if you have some evidence that fits coherently and consistently within my worldview from where I'm coming from an internal critique, which I believe is what you're using, if I'm familiar with the Van Tillian approach,
Yeah.
then I would like to hear it, but I'm going to leave open, even though I'm maximally certain that's not 100%. I could know where morality comes from, and I'm just unaware of where to pay attention to, where that is in my knowledge base. So,
Okay.
but that's, so I would say that my certainty that I don't know is around 95, but I will leave open the fact that there is a 5% probability that I do know. But that's also like a weird thing, because talking about what I don't know and being confident about that is a different statement than being maximally confident that you do know something, from my perspective. But so I'll just put that out there. I wasn't arguing against certainty. I know that certainty exists, but it doesn't mean that what belief I'm certain about is a certitude, which is something that exists objectively from us. Certainty and confidence only apply to our subjective beliefs.
Okay. I do want to discuss that a little bit, about certainty a little bit, but I wanted to kind of go back about your statement that one man's certainty and another man's uncertainty is his intellectual honesty, I think was the way that you use that. Is that correct?
Intellectual integrity, honesty.
Intellectual integrity. That's what it was. Intellectual integrity and honesty. And my response to that was, and this is what I would like to see you interact with first. And then we can go back to discussing certainty based, on a scale.
Oh yeah. The only reason why I brought that up is that is what you prefaced. What I think you're going to address now with the begging the question component.
Yeah. So exactly. So what I wanted to ask you is kind of respond to that, and I'll kind of make sure that my audience, if they didn't hear my response, to just kind of briefly summarize. So when Christopher had said that one man's certainty is another man's another man's uncertainty is just his intellectual integrity and honesty. What I responded to that is that that is question begging, because to be uncertain about and to say, from my worldview as a Christian, I obviously unapologetically hold to that. I believe the Bible is true. I believe that it is absolute, and that it is my presupposition. And that from my worldview, to say, if I made the statement that I don't know, I don't have certainty, I don't have knowledge about where morality or consciousness comes from my worldview, that would be blasphemous. It would not be intellectual honesty. And so the reason I say that you're begging the question, Christopher, is because the intellectual honesty part of not knowing would only be true if your worldview was true. So it assumes that your worldview is true, because from mine it is not. So I kind of wanted to see if you could respond to that particular argument.
Yes, I was muting myself because I was trying to do other things in the background, and I didn't want you to hear clickety clackety while you're talking.
Okay, no problem.
But it always takes me long to get to my mic button. So I have to be honest. So I have two different ways of addressing this. One of them is, it sounds less like you're arguing that I'm begging the question than it is that we might have different definitions of what intellectual integrity is from our worldviews. From your worldview, it is consistent that having integrity is believing in Romans chapter 1, and based on that, you do know, right? That is, knowing is intellectual integrity, right? From your worldview, that is consistent. From my worldview, which doesn't, rely on the Bible, and from all my presuppositions, intellectual integrity is based on the model of critical thinking, where step one is admitting what you don't know, admitting where the limits of your knowledge are. So consistent with my worldview, I'm defining intellectual integrity like that. What I'm not doing is saying that my worldview is true or better or anything objectively. What I'm saying is these are the things that I value intellectual integrity based on how I just defined it.
Oh, okay. So I'd like to respond to that, because when you had made that comment in our hangout, you did say that my knowing and your not knowing, and you seem to compare my knowing and my certainty, and you compared that to your not knowing, and you said that that was more intellectually honest. So
I don't remember saying more.
Okay, maybe you didn't. I'd have to go back and look. But you know, if that's you can change your position too. I don't.
Oh, and if I did say more, that was probably inartful, inarticulate. What I really was saying is being consistent with your worldview, having certainty about these things is valued. In my worldview, and you know, I can even go so far as to use like metaphors like you seem to be working from a top-down approach where, you know, God has made the rules and you're adhering to them, whereas I'm coming from a bottom-up approach where, based on how I'm cobbling together my understanding of reality, I have a lot of I don't knows.
So then let me interact with that for briefly. So from your perspective, since your definition of intellectual integrity and honesty is just simply different than mine, and mine is based upon my presuppositions and yours is based upon your presuppositions, and they cannot be used in order to interact. We just have different definitions. So how is it possible that you can even have a discussion with me? That we can even have a discussion at all discussing these things if your intellectual integrity is simply that which you define, it doesn't apply to me, it's really meaningless within my worldview, and since it's just your own subjective definition of intellectual integrity and honesty, how do you interact with any other individuals within your reality and within your society to even say that intellectual integrity is anything that anyone, because this is just your own subjective definition, how do you interact with people within reality, within your reality? Or do you have a reality, or are you just, you don't know of anything outside of yourself?
No, I'm not a solipsist.
Okay.
Or solipsist. I don't
solipsist, yeah.
Solipsist, thank you. Yeah. I put the I before the O. It's not a subjective definition in that I just made it up, right? There are systems of understanding that are used for critical thinking. And those are the things that I adhere to, but I'm leaving it open to argument. And, you know, within that realm of if you're going to argue against how critical thinking should move forward, I'm open to hearing those things. And intellectual integrity, one component is knowing the limits of your understanding. So that's the one thing. It's not subjective. It's not, Chris Maude didn't make this up. And I have, like, you know, lecture series that I can point you to where there is convergence and corroboration of these things. So that's the first point. The second point is, how do I have conversations with other people with different definitions of intellectual integrity? The same way that we're doing what we're doing right now.
So in other words, you can't critique anything that I'm saying because you just have different definitions than I have. So how can you critique anything that I'm saying? Because you're just coming from a different worldview. How can you interact with what I'm saying?
I'm not critiquing it, right? I'm an externalist, right? And if I understand presuppositionalism correctly, you're mostly an internalist. You're trying to find, you're doing an internal critique of my worldview to show that it's somehow inconsistent in some way, and that yours internally critiqued is more consistent, and you value that consistency, right? From an internal perspective. Am I getting this correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're summarizing it somewhat. Now, what I would say,
I have to. I mean, if I can't spend a half hour explaining my understanding of it, but for the sake of conversation,
that's somewhat. I would agree. I would agree with that. Now, but I do want to. You mentioned something earlier, just a few minutes earlier, that I wanted to, because you said we would need to interact with one another and discuss on how, what our processes are of critical thinking in order to come to a conclusion. You're saying that you're using, now correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that you're using some sort of process of critical thinking to come forward with your definition of intellectual integrity and honesty. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, I like it.
Okay. And so then you said that we would have to have a discussion to see if we have different views of critical thinking. So let me ask you this: is there a universal standard, for example, like the laws of logic, by which we ought to engage in critical thinking? And if somebody is not using this, their thinking is not critical, and they're not coming to rational conclusions.
So the answer to your question is no. How critical thinking exists is how it has developed, and it hopefully will develop further so that it gets refined. And the most basic, if we were to step back and look at what it is that you're asking me, it really has everything to do with operational definitions. If we're going to talk about topic X or definition Y, we need to have a meeting of the minds about what topic X means and what topic Y means. Because within different contexts, its usage might emerge or manifest as different meanings. So if we want to use the same words having the same meanings, we need to agree on what the operational definitions are. And we may not agree on them.
So you said something about critical thinking changing and kind of developing over time. Mm-hmm. Do you think that at some point in time contradictions were considered valid?
Things that we currently consider contradictions?
No, just the law of non-contradiction, that A cannot be both A and not A at the same time in the same place.
Well, we're seeing that in quantum physics.
Well, I don't know how much you've discussed quantum physics, or researched quantum physics, but I would actually disagree that it is, there are paradoxes within quantum physics, but I don't think that they're contradictory. It depends upon, and we have to get a little bit into some science here, but it depends upon the perspective of the observer. And the act of observing can actually interact with, at a quantum level, can interact with particles, and they take upon different properties based upon that interaction. So it's based upon, I've done, and it's been a while since I've done, I used to study a lot of quantum physics, and I used to listen to Leonard Susskind, and I've done a lot of studying on that. And most quantum physicists would not say, Leonard Susskind would not say that there's anything contradictory at the quantum level. It may seem paradoxical to us initially, but when you look at it, it's simply our observing of particles would interacts with them and makes them take upon different properties based upon how we're observing them. So okay, I would disagree. I would disagree that quantum physics is contradictory.
So this is another example of having operational definitions, right?
Yeah. Well,
so what you're considering a paradox, I would consider a contradiction. Yeah. And it really has less to do with observation. A particle is also a wave. If you have definitions for waves not being particles, they are the same thing. A is also not A, because a wave is not a particle, yet a wave is a particle. But I mean, without getting into the physics talk, let's disagree. You were talking about contradictions in critical thinking. So let me redirect
I want to actually interact, not at a scientific level, but I want to quickly interact with what you just said there. So you said that you believe that it's actually a contradiction. So then my next question for you would be this: are contradictions true within your worldview? Can they be true within your worldview?
I never thought about that question, so I don't have an answer.
Okay. Well, I mean, you did say that you did think that at the quantum level that it is true that both a particle is it is both A and not A at the same time in the same place. Mm-hmm. So,
but we don't live at the quantum level, so that's,
Well, that is within your reality, though. So
lots of things are within my reality that I'm not living at the level of.
Well, I agree with that. So why would you arbitrarily choose that things that you're not at the level of is what doesn't contradict, or where you don't accept contradictions, but you do accept contradictions in areas that are not at your level?
Sure. Because the law of contradiction is a philosophical concept, and the philosophy of science taps into all of those layers. So it was merely a case in point about, I have a feeling that you're going to have a pretty hardcore reliance on the law of contradiction that I don't. So it was just one of many examples where if you're going to dip into philosophy and the philosophy of science, then there are examples where contradiction and the law of non-contradiction as it is used by presuppositional apologists is trivial.
Okay. So can you explain to me why your justification for your arbitrary, to me it seems arbitrary. So explain to me how it's not arbitrary that you're saying that it applies in this area, but it does not apply in this area, or you don't think it applies in this area. You're not sure.
Because if it exists in some areas and not others, then that takes it out of the definition of being absolute. And as I understand from my previous interactions with presuppositional apologists, they consider it an absolute law.
Okay. So how do you know it doesn't exist in your reality?
I don't.
Your level. Okay.
I don't.
So contradictions might be true within your reality. You're just not sure.
Depending on your definition of the terms.
Well, contradiction A cannot be both not A cannot it cannot be both A and not A in the same time in the same place. So that's my definition of a contradiction. So,
and you're talking about objective reality.
I'm talking about all of reality. Yeah,
they may exist, but I might not be able to perceive them.
Okay. So the other thing I wanted to briefly mention, which I think. Let's see here. Let's see. No, not going to answer that.
Well, thank you. How socially appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, I got to take a call.
No, I'm going to take a call live on Google Hangout with Christopher. Yeah. Well, let's interact with that briefly. Socially appropriate.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I think you keep borrowing from my worldview, Christopher.
Oh, there's the other part of the argument. So, and do you seriously want to interact with this comment, or was that just like a jab, like a rhetorical?
Well,
jab?
I mean, that goes back to actually that was really the next thing I was going to talk about was
perfect.
When I think that from my perspective, Christopher, when you say that that intellectual honesty is something that should be, is good. It's something that you try to move towards. Now you say it's your own definition of that, but it is something that you value. I think is the word they use. From my perspective, Christopher, that there is nothing of value if atheism is true. If atheism is true, there's nothing it's just flat. There is no value system in order to judge anything by. So when you say that is something that you value, and we could talk about what intellectual integrity is. I mean, I think that you and I would both agree that intellectual integrity is the act of not purposely misleading and being dishonest, and so I think we would agree with that. But I think the reason we agree is we both have, as a Christian, I would say that we both have a morality that's revealed to us by God. Now, you're not giving grounding to God for that morality. You're grounding it in yourself. But I think I believe from my perspective, that when you say that is something that you value, that you are borrowing from my worldview, because if atheism is true, you can't, I'd like you to give an accounting for it, but you're going to probably just say you can't give an accounting for it, which is what you've said in the past. So can you briefly interact with that when I say that you're borrowing? Do you see why I say that you're borrowing?
Oh, sure. I accept that you see it that way. That doesn't bother me at all. To be honest, I find the claim that one person is borrowing from another person's worldview is a trivial rhetorical claim. And it's just kind of meant to gain points in some way, shape, or form. That's how I perceive it. And the reason why I perceive it that way is because it's really where it comes down to brass tacks. And I think that we talked about this before. From your perspective, your worldview encompasses mine, because first God, then man. From my perspective, my worldview encompasses yours, because first man, then God. And all of the attributes that you give to your God, from my perspective, is merely a testament to human creativity. So you can account for the God that was made up by man, from my perspective, in such ways that you can feel that you're accounting for the creativity that exists, because for you, God comes first. For me, man comes first. So I can just easily say that the logic that you're using and the creativity with which you're imbuing attributes to your God, you're borrowing from my worldview, because from my worldview, I use human psychology and creativity as a component for the history of religion.
Okay, so
but it's trivial, and that's why I don't use that argument, because it doesn't mean anything.
So is a trivial rhetorical claim something that's not good? That's something that we shouldn't use?
I don't know about but I don't find it has value.
Okay, so now, do you understand when I say that you are borrowing from my worldview, when you make moral claims and when you use morality? When, just for example, you say that you don't value a trivial rhetorical claim, or you do value intellectual integrity. From my position, I don't think that your worldview can account for anything having any value, more or less. So why are you saying that these have value? Are you just arbitrarily picking some things have value, but you can't really give a reason why you value them?
It depends on the circumstances and the thing that we're talking about. Now, let's take a quick step back. Previously, in our previous discussion, I already admitted that I don't know where morality or ethics comes from. And you claim that you do. And, even in the example that you just gave, or the questions that you just posed, you are placing value on your ability to account for presuppositions. Where did you learn that from? From who did you learn that there is value in being able to justify your presuppositions?
God.
Personal revelation, or is it in the Bible?
Both. Okay.
Where in the Bible does it say that?
Where in the Bible does it say that we ought to value morality?
No, that being able to justify a moral stance has more value than admitting that you don't know where the morals come from.
Well, okay, now let's just take that to, and I'll give you an answer for that. Okay. Let's take that to, so the Bible tells us that God exists, and he has given moral mandates. It tells us in Psalm 14:1 that the fool says in his heart there is no God. And in Romans 1, it tells us that they suppress the truth of God. Now, these are all sins. So if I would make the statement that I don't know where morality comes from, when God has told me and has revealed in his special revelation, and he also tells us in that special revelation, that in general revelation, that he has revealed this to each and every one, so for me to go, there's my justification, because if I would not, then I would be denying the revelation of God.
Okay, we're talking about two different things. What you're talking about is the fact that you can justify morality because of the existence of God, versus the fact that I'm saying that I can't. What I'm talking about is, where did you learn that being able to account for it has value, right? Sure, from your worldview, it's consistent that morals came from God, right? So that's your justification. But within that internal critique, where does it say that having a justification has value? And if you're going to argue against my worldview, where it's consistent to say that I don't have a justification, then you're crossing a boundary of internal critique into external critique. And if you're going to go between internal and external, I think that you're misapplying the presuppositional apologetic.
Okay. So you don't see, when I gave when I described why I value that I have a foundation is because God has said that he is the foundation.
I'm not asking why you have the value. I'm asking, where is it written that value makes your worldview better than a worldview that doesn't account for morals?
Well, okay. So, do you think that when the Bible says it's foolish, and only a fool says in his heart there is no God? Now, I'm not engaging in. I hope, Christopher, you don't understand here. I'm just saying you the fool. Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no.
I'm not.
Oh,
I'm not
come on.
saying that.
Come on, Jason. We have a better relationship than that.
Yeah.
Come on.
But when I say that, you don't see that the Bible is very clear that to say that, to deny that grounding and that foundation is foolish, that is not a better value than, it's not the Bible. Nowhere, there's no text. If you're asking me to give you a text that says it is of value to presuppose and account for morality with God. No, the Bible says repeatedly that, like, for example, in Judges, it talks about men did what was right in their own eyes, and it criticizes that. Well, that is to say that I'm not grounding my morality within God.
I understand all of that, but now I'd like you to,
So if you're looking for a specific text that says it's all through the Bible. It is the entire assumption of all those things, that it's foolish to deny the foundation, and it is good and is pleasing to God to appeal to him as the grounding for all of morality and all the things that we ought to do. And as him as creator, we don't justify anything. There's nothing within me that is autonomous. I'm wholly dependent upon God for every single aspect of my being in my life. And so the Bible is very clear that it does not value that. Now, if you're looking, like I said, if you're looking to me to give you chapter and verse that says that is of value, my thing is just read the entire Bible. The Bible is very clear on that it values that, and does not value those that say everyone just did what was right in their own eyes, and that a fool says that there is no God. So, do you understand? Are you still saying that I'm not answering your question, or?
I think that I might not be asking it well. So allow me to try a different technique. From my worldview, presuppositions don't require justification because they are basal assumptions. The critique that I'm hearing from you against my worldview is that when I say that I presuppose that morals exist, right? If this is me stepping out of my moral nihilist framework, right? If I were to assume that I presuppose that people engage in behaviors that move towards goals and away from punishment, that it doesn't require justification. And it seems that your argument is, you can't justify for it, but I can. Therefore, my worldview is better and yours is absurd. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me if somebody thinks that my worldview is absurd. That is also a trivial rhetorical move from my perspective. Now, I do understand that it bruises a lot of atheists' egos to have people tell them that, and that gets them all riled up, and that's where the most entertaining debates between presups and atheists come from. And I sidestep that whole thing by just accepting that you think that my worldview is absurd because I can't do the thing that I'm not required to do from my worldview.
Let me actually quickly, Andrew just messaged me, so I'm going to message him real quick, and then
I'm going to tell a joke while you do that.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
It's a clean joke.
Okay, that was going to say.
Oh, no problem.
I don't know what to expect, from your assumed morality there. So
from my wackiness, what is socially appropriate, right? All right. So why should you never write with a dull pencil?
You want me to interact with this?
No, you can just it's a setup.
Oh, okay.
Just say why.
Why? Because
it's pointless.
Well, okay. Yeah. I'll chuckle with that a little bit later.
Why won't alligators eat clowns? Because they taste funny.
Let's see here. I've got some really. My wife hates my jokes, by the way. She thinks
is it because they're bad?
Well, no, she hates them because they're just lame. Like, is it further to town or by bus?
Oh, nice. Or that's like a non sequitur. Like, I'd rather walk to school than eat my lunch.
Yeah. Do you walk to school or pack your lunch?
Yeah. How many gallons does it take to get to the city?
Yeah. Is it colder in the mountain than it is in the summer?
Those are good. I want you to write them down and send them to me. They're like perfect non sequiturs.
So, okay, let's see here if he responds. I see he may have joined as a viewer. I'm not sure. Let's see here. Andrew, if you are there, just go ahead and click on the link to join that I sent you, and you should be able to come in as a participant, and I will add you to the discussion if you want to. I don't know if you're there or not. So let's see here. Let me send another message here to him. We are.
So little Johnny is having problems in school, and his teachers and the guidance counselor want his parents to come in. So they come in and they have a meeting with Johnny, and they want to understand, like exactly where his problem lies. And so the teacher draws 3 like lollipop trees and puts a plus sign between them. And he goes, "Okay, Johnny, what's this plus this plus this?" And Johnny looks at it and goes, "That's 9." And the guy's like, maybe I didn't draw them well enough. So he draws a little bit of, dirt under each of the trees. He's like, "All right, Johnny, one more time. What's this plus this plus this?" And Johnny goes, "Well, that's 99. The guy's like, "Man, maybe my artistic ability is really lame. So let me draw a little dog poop next to each one of them so that he knows that it's a tree." So he draws them and he goes, "Okay, Johnny, last time. What's this plus this plus this?" And Johnny goes, "That's 100. And finally the counselor's like, "Well, I don't know how you got those answers. Could you justify why you gave those answers?" And so Johnny goes, "Well, yeah, tree plus tree plus tree is 9. Dirty tree plus dirty tree plus dirty tree is 99. And dirty tree and a turd and dirty tree and a turd and dirty tree and a turd is 100.
I like that. That's creative. Alrighty, so time for the comedic show to end because everybody's going to either drop off and never listen to this episode again.
We're here all week. Try the veal.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if Andrew's going to jump in or not, but if he does,
he's in. You have to broadcast him.
We'll Andy, 1 second, I have to get my daughter situated. Oh, okay.
But you do have to click on him and broadcast him for him to be seen and heard.
There we go.
There it is. All right, so he'll unmute himself when he gets the daughter situated.
Okay, well, let's continue interacting while we're waiting for Andy. But
okay. So the last thing that I said was, from my perspective, presuppositions don't need to be justified, and your critique against my worldview is that I don't have that justification. So that's kind of where I left off what we last said.
Yeah. Okay. So I did want to interact with that, and so what my response to that would be is that the presuppositions that you presuppose are the ones justified within my worldview. So they're the same ones. You have the ones that are justified within mine. You just don't like the justification. So you don't have from my position, you don't have a logical reason, a rational reason for example, I want to jump back to the analogy that you and I had discussed after the show the last time, which I wish we would have broadcasted and then we didn't. So I'll use the analogy, the 5th floor. A guy. I work. I'm here in Sarasota. I work on a tower. In fact, I'm on the 7th floor of a tower. Is where I work. That's where my office is at. So let's say I get into work and one of my fellow employees says that he does not believe in any of the floors prior to the 7th floor, and he does not even believe there's a foundation to the building. And so my response to him would be, well, you can't even justify, my first question is, are you on the 7th floor? Well, yeah, that's my presupposition. I simply assume that, but I don't have to justify my presupposition. And I say, okay, but you're on the 7th floor, right? Well, yeah, but I don't believe in the prior floors. Well, from my position, he is being inconsistent because he is he's agreeing that he's on the seventh floor, which requires what is a priori to that, but he doesn't, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to admit that the foundation and the previous 6 floors exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he's left is with a building hanging in midair with no justification for it. So that is my from my position, Christopher. That is how I see what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I have interacted on that particular example before. So I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yeah. So and I've been able to kind of ruminate about it a little bit. So the first question I would have is, why is being consistent about that of value?
Well, I mean, and that's the answer that you have to answer. If you say, well, that just doesn't matter to me, that is something that you have to deal with within your own heart and within your own mind. Because from my position, Christopher, this is a and this comes from my worldview, Christopher, and I have these discussions because I honestly really care about those that do not trust in Christ as their Savior, because it is my heart's desire that you come to know Him the way that I know Him.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that you have to, and any other atheists out there, you have to think about this. What is the reason why I don't want to value that which would justify my presuppositions? Why is it that I don't? Is there some other reason? Do I have a rational reason why I don't?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there something else? Is there another reason why I don't? And that's something that I don't necessarily, if you want to respond to that, you can or you can't. But that's just something that, I'm a Christian, so I preach the gospel. So that is something that I will always do. So,
and I don't take offense to that.
Yeah.
I think that it is consistent for you, and I view it as you caring, as a version of an emergent property of your compassion. So
okay.
you won't hear me arguing against you preaching the gospel.
Okay. So what is your just response to the fact that you say why do you have to value that? Do you have a response to that, or that's just do you think you have rational reasons for why you don't value that, or you just choose not to value it?
So I'm going to say something that is not going to sound. You'll get a chuckle out of it. I'll just put it like that.
Okay.
It is a basal assumption of mine that there are going to be certain topics that seem inconsistent with my goals. So my inability to understand, or my inability to know, or my lack of knowledge about the origins of certain things that I just accept exist, is consistent with my worldview. To put it differently, inconsistencies about certain topics are consistent within my worldview because I already presuppose that those inconsistencies will exist. To put it a different way, I'm a hypocrite. I try to be as less of a hypocrite, as least hypocritical as possible.
Well, welcome to the
think
club.
Exactly. But I think that all humans are. You know what I mean? Like, I think that humans shouldn't be killed unnecessarily. Well, taken in certain avenues, I will have views that are inconsistent with that. I think that animals should be treated humanely until you kill them for me to eat. So I'm hypocritical on the obtuse extractions of where some of these topics will go. And I accept that. And I try to be as least hypocritical as possible. But I accept that I am a hypocrite, and I'm fine with that.
And going back to gospel preaching, I mean, the thing that I would want to make sure that anyone listening to this, and even you, Christopher, and I think you already know this, but it's not that I'm saying, as a Christian, we don't say that, well, I'm saved because you atheists are hypocrites, and I'm not a hypocrite. I say that I am saved by the grace of God, and God has saved me in spite of my hypocrisy that I have lived over my life. Now, as a Christian, I I mortify that sin. That's a biblical term coming from Romans chapter 8. But I try to put to death that natural flesh, what we call our flesh, are my natural tendency to want to be hypocritical, to want to be able to disguise those things from others, that my inconsistencies. And so I put those to death daily, and I try to live a life that is glorifying to Christ and to God. But have I been a hypocrite, and am I still a hypocrite even as a Christian? Yeah, often, more often than I would even want to admit to anyone. But those things, as a Christian, I know that those hypocrisies are under the blood of Christ, and that He has saved me from those. So
now, yeah. that brings it back to my point. Those hypocrisies, those inconsistencies, they exist between both of our worldviews. So whether or not I have consistencies, or are consistent, or am hypocritical, or have inconsistencies, that's not really a critique against my worldview.
Well, I want to jump back and interact with that, because you may have misunderstood me a little bit. I'm not saying that I don't live sometimes inconsistent, which is a sin within my worldview. I don't believe the Christian worldview is inconsistent at all. I believe that it is completely cohesive, coherent, and consistent. But do I always, as a fallen human being, as a creature that's has a fallen nature, do I always live consistent with that worldview? And the answer is that I don't, but I don't justify that inconsistency. I am mandated by my worldview to repent and turn from that inconsistency.
Well, I was addressing the analogy, right? Because the first question you asked, if I were from your perspective, I'm standing on the 7th floor.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that I'm on the 7th floor, but I can't account for the foundation or floors 1 through 6, and that is inconsistent. Yep.
Yeah.
That's my answer. Yep.
Yeah.
It's inconsistent. I accept those inconsistencies. I don't have an answer for the existence of things that I observe.
And so, as a Christian, what we do is this is how we as Christians live. We acknowledge that the foundation and the previous floors are there. We acknowledge that God exists. But whenever we sin, whenever we go against what God has mandated for us to do as what we ought to do, whenever we go against that, what we are doing is we're actually functioning like an atheist. In that moment, we're actually saying, no, I will not conform myself to what God has said I ought to do, but I want to do what I want to do. I'm going to act like the floors don't exist beneath me. I'm going to act like God doesn't exist. That does not mean that our worldview is not consistent.
I'm not arguing that it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to clarify that.
Oh, I know. And one other thing I want to clarify is, and please excuse if this sounds more challenging than I mean it to be. In our discussions, I haven't critiqued your worldview once, right? Because that's not. I'm not compelled to do that in any way, shape, or form. But I'm happy to answer questions from you who has a critical perception of my worldview. So when I explain myself, it's not to say I'm like this and you're not. I'm not obligated to persuade you out of your worldview or into mine. I'm merely answering questions about what I think and why I think
it. So I don't take this, but I think you did challenge me on providing a justification for the fact that I value that having a foundation. You asked me for a biblical justification for that.
Oh yeah, but that wasn't to say that it was wrong. I was trying to point out that the particular technique that you were using was more external than it was internal, based on my understanding of how presuppositional apologetics works. So I wasn't saying that your worldview is incorrect. I was making a very specific critique against a particular move that you made.
Yeah. Okay. No, I understand that.
Within an argument.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, let's see here. Is Andy? Andy, are you there? Do you need me to unmute you? I think you should have control.
I think that once you broadcast him, only he can unmute himself.
Oh, okay. Looks like he's back. Okay. You want to go ahead and just unmute yourself, Andy?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. It was funny because I was up doing something and I just happened to log on, and then I saw maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, I saw your emails come through, and I was like, oh no, did I miss?
No, that was my fault. It was my
Jason already
fault.
admitted.
My fault.
But the fact that you're here is like wonderful because this is what you and he, the conversation between you and he is what he planned. He just got the date wrong.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
I had the wrong date. And Andy, I still want to do this with you next Saturday. So Christopher and I have had a good discussion here for about an hour. But I don't know. Have you listened to any of our discussions so far, Andy?
Yeah, I've listened to some of it, and I'm familiar with Christopher. I'm not a guy who gets on a lot of podcasts, but I've definitely seen Christopher around on YouTube and watched several of his videos and so forth. So I'm familiar. I'm not terribly familiar with everything, but I've watched a fair share of your videos, especially on like Bible Thumping Wingnut and so forth. So
Well, I'm flattered, and it's a pleasure
yeah.
to meet you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
So Andy, did you want to maybe we can so we can actually fit the description of the podcast briefly? And I talked to Christopher about this initially, that we might go into the discussion a little bit, talk about Christian Science, and I think you have from our interaction over email and back and forth that you do have a background within scientific fields, and so what is let's maybe kind of shift the discussion here, and it's actually kind of nice that that Christopher is on here so he can kind of interact with us a little bit on some of
Yeah, I totally agree. It'd be kind of cool to have a trilateral discussion here.
Yeah.
So.
What from looking at evolution, Andy? Which Christopher and I have previously discussed this. He does believe in the naturalistic evolutionary process. What is your critique from a scientific perspective? What is one of the critiques that you would have from? Now we've been talking presuppositionally here, but now shifting the conversation here to some more scientific, evidential-based things. Andy, what is some of your critiques of evolution?
Sure. Actually, in some ways, I would say my critique is somewhat presuppositional as well, in the sense that, like for example, my undergraduate degrees in physics, and my master's degree in electrical engineering. Not that makes me an expert on everything, but I have formal scientific training. And one thing, just to put it more in the frame of a story, when I was going to undergrad and I had my senior year, I took an astrophysics course. That was the last course I took. And by the way, just for your audience, I've been a Christian pretty much my entire life. I don't have any recollections of not being a Christian, actually, but and we could go into that at some other hangout, Jason, if you're interested in talking about that too. But on this topic, I took an astrophysics course, and the thing that really threw me into really questioning a lot of things. And by the way, I am a professional scientist, as is my vocation. That the error bars that I saw when I was being presented with the evidence, particularly even just in astrophysics, the error bars are massive. And when I was taking this course from an astronomer, cosmologist, and I just couldn't get a good answer as to how we know things very certainly in observational science. I think one thing you and Jason and I have talked about too is I think there's a general misunderstanding for the layperson, somebody without scientific training, for example, and they kind of lump historical science, experimental science, and something akin to like a mathematical proof all into the same bucket and just call that science. And my big problem with that is that the rigor associated in those different disciplines is massive, and our level of certainty about what we're doing in those different areas is massive. And I think it takes, for someone to throw out that evolution is true, when I'm talking to other unbelievers, for example, it takes me so long to unpack what their presuppositions are about science and how much explanatory power it has in these different areas. Our certainty in Newton's laws is very different than our certainty that we have in, for example, evolution, biological evolution. When I'm talking evolution, I'm talking what they would call macroevolution, or evolution from a common ancestor. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that completely. I think there's a massive disconnect among a lot of the people walking the street and that went through it, took some high school science classes, is they don't understand the distinction between historical science and that which is observable science. The objective observable sciences are very different than the assumption based, and when I say especially with evolution, all evolutionary propositions that are said to be true begin with an assumption of naturalism, which is not justified, it is simply assumed. And Christopher, do you have any sort of response? Do you see the distinction there between historical and observable science? And do you see how often there is a fallacy there with meshing and equivocating the two?
Well, I do believe two things. I do believe that there is a dovetailing between historical and what you consider historical and observational science. Within science, those terms are rarely used. So I also feel that the scientific literacy of the general population is paltry. And I am an advocate for a better science education via formal and informal science communications. So, yeah, people, and the worst is, as an atheist, hearing atheists use science as a bludgeon that it is completely flaccid at.
Christopher, quick question for you too. One thing that I notice as well, which kind of drives me a little bit nuts, is I think there's been a proliferation of the celebrity scientist. By that I mean like the Bill Nye and the Neil deGrasse Tyson, is that his name? Yeah. Who are really they're trying to create a celebrity for themselves on television. And they take these extremely difficult topics, say for example in astrophysics, where our understanding and knowledge of these things is quite coarse and much more uncertain, and they present it in a way that, and they're trying to dumb it down for the layman, but the layman doesn't really fully appreciate how noisy this data is. And I'm speaking of generalities here. I mean, we'd have to get into specifically what I'm talking about, but I can tell you as a general statement, the data that we have is extremely noisy, and it's hard to fully appreciate that by watching an hour PBS special, and I think that's where a lot of this disconnect comes from, or what you see in, say, a high school or grammar school textbook on the subject. As far as historical versus experimental versus stuff you do in theoretical physics, the interesting thing there is, when you said it's not handled in or discussed in science, what do you mean by that? Because my experience is that it's very much understood what type of science regime we're working in.
I feel like I'm on an elevator.
Here, I got my daughter here. Hold on one second. Let me mute.
I was getting into that. Yeah. So he asked me about. So what I said was the terms historical and observational science are not used a lot in science, right? So I engage in psychophysical science, right? I study the psychology of the sense of smell, olfaction. When we use evolutionary models as hypotheses that we test on observable behaviors, in our papers we don't go, the historical science says this, and that's the evolutionary component. And then the research that we did is this observational science. That's that distinction is fluid. It is assumed that the whole of science is based on precedents that have been set by other experimenters and our attempts to rely on them as explanatory and predictive models. So that's what I meant. The actual terms, historical versus observational, as though they're two distinct things, that's more of a trope for creation scientists.
I agree that it's a little bit. It's never like if you sit down and read something in the literature, it's not going to say we are now in the regime of historical science or we are now in the regime of experimental science. The thing is, though,
regime sounds so military. I get what you're saying, though.
The thing is, though, is, for example, if we're performing an experiment where you can't closely control the parameters, and say, for example, you're digging up a fossil, you don't know what the initial conditions of that experiment were, and you can't reproduce it. So you're stuck kind of in this area of to some extent, speculation about what the conditions were by which this thing was fossilized, or and so forth.
Well, let's stick with that specific example, finding a fossil. One person finding one fossil obviously cannot be reproduced, right? But depending on what claims are made about that fossil, with an understanding of geology and tectonics and age of layers, right? If the claim being made is that this fossil is whatever, they wanted to date it. Maybe that's the claim they want to make. Well, okay, using the model that exists of what the hell is it called? What the heck is it called? My apologies. Sorry. I can't think of it. I'm not a geologist, but the model that they use to age the layers. If they say it's in level X, Devonian, right, and they age it at whatever from several different sources, and then in another place where their understanding of this level being Devonian, they find another fossil and they age it, or they age the soil around it, whichever, and they come up with a similar within error bars date, then it can be reproduced. That particular claim, there can be reproducible evidence for that particular claim, and I'm just using age as an example. If they're claiming that it is part of a different species, well then finding other, let's say it's a human, or a pre-human, or whatever species you want to use, whatever animal. If there are other bones in that area, then the assumption that is made is they're reproducing that the bones of this animal died at this time when they in other areas where this layer is being investigated are finding the same thing, and that way it is reproducible.
Sure, but I don't think it is a different regime than what we do when we're doing science in a lab, for example, where it's very different.
I just want to address the way that you're phrasing things. When we do science in a lab, the example that I just gave is a wonderful example of how fluid observational versus historical science are. When a fossil is found in a certain layer, and the samples are given to a chemistry lab for GCMS, there is both observation of the fossil being found, which has a historical context, and then the analysis of the samples by the chemists is a observational research in real time component. It is fluid. The historical and observational dichotomy that I hear frequently, I've just given an example where that is completely fluid, and those distinctions are arbitrary.
Okay.
Hold on, though. One second.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say the one key thing, though, there's an attribute here that makes a big difference, and that's reproducibility. Mm-hmm. If you can reproduce, so for example, in a lab, I can control the initial conditions, and then I can perform that experiment over and over and over and over and over again. even in the scenario you're talking about, I can't reproduce it. And that's a key attribute that, in my mind, differentiates those two regimes. Or I don't know what term you want to use, that regime, but two different categories.
But I can give you 2 examples where it is reproducible. Send the samples to different labs. If they come to a conclusion, and there's going to be variance. Error bars are they're inevitable. In fact, if everyone came back with the exact same data from several different sources, that would be questionable. So
you can reproduce the measurement.
Yes.
That I agree with, but you can't reproduce the event.
Well, I just gave an example of how you could. So there's 2 levels of reproducibility.
Let me jump in here for 1 second. So the thing that I want you to recognize, Christopher, is that while we can take samples and we can take them to a lab, you can send them to multiple labs, and we're going to conclude that it has these type of minerals encompass the particular fossil. We can come out with different conclusions, and maybe they're even confirmed in multiple scientific labs. That, though, is empirical observable science. What is then assumed with historical assumptions about historical sciences is that particular layer of rock was laid down at a particular point in time, which is based upon a naturalistic assumption. And it is not confirmed, because we look at the layers completely differently. Now, we're looking at the same thing. So as a Christian scientist, I would take that same fossil and send it to a lab, and I would also discover the same minerals. I would discover that it is in the same type of layer that maybe another fossil in another part of the world is in. However, I'm going to look at that layer differently. I'm going to look at those layers as, for me, I'm a young Earth creationist, so I look at them as being laid down by a global flood, and it's the standard stratification that results as a result of liquefaction of sedimentary sediments and things like that. They will layer themselves, and I forget the actual term for that, but they will layer themselves as a result. And also, there are things within the geological layers that is inconsistent with the view that they were formed over, which is result of the naturalistic assumption that they're simply laid down over millions of years. When we see things like polystrate fossils that go up through multiple layers, that refutes the view that this layer, or that these layers were put down slowly over.
It doesn't refute. It's a misuse of the word refute. It is an anomaly that is explained by geologists. You may or may not accept those explanations, but they don't refute the model of geology that exists.
Okay, but let me go back to the naturalistic assumption that is part of this, is that what tends to happen is people look at these historical models that are put in place by scientists making basically guesses of what has happened in the past, and they make certain guesses. And
you're using. I have to interrupt. That rhetorical move of saying that scientists are making guesses is horribly incorrect, right?
Well,
because colloquially speaking, guesses are neither here nor there. In science, using the scientific method that is appropriate for each field, these are educated guesses via hypotheses that have predictive and explanatory power. Those are not the same guesses as the way you just used the word.
Okay, well that's fine, but I'm going to still say that it is a guess based upon a naturalistic assumption. They make the assumption that the universe and the Earth is not the result of supernatural creation, so they simply assume naturalism. So because their assumption is naturalism at the beginning, they then have to conclude that this is the result of long periods of time over that has to be the now. And then what they tend to do is they'll say they assume naturalism, they then result in the geological layer system, and then they conclude that naturalism is true. That's begging the question. That is concluding with what you start with. When you assume supernaturalism, it's also when when you assume Christian supernaturalism, you also have an explanation for things like the geological layers. And so then we do the same things in observable science. We take fossils as Christians and we analyze them with empirical science and observationally within laboratories, and we come up with the same results. But we are going to interpret those results differently based upon the assumptions that we start with when we look at it historically. And so that is the distinction that we have to make. So a Christian scientist is going to have the same lab results as what an evolutionary scientist is. The question then there is what are you going to, what system are you going to run those results through? And the Christian runs it through his supernatural worldview, and the atheist runs it through his presupposed naturalistic worldview. And so both of us, no one comes neutrally to the evidence.
Yeah, I'd point out a couple things about what Jason said. What's interesting is that I think it's really important to understand, for example, if you're talking about things in a lab that you can reproduce at will, okay? Reproduce at will is, I guess, the key. So those things that, let's say, for example, Newton's laws, those things coming at it with a naturalistic worldview appears to be the correct view, meaning that we believe that the universe does follow certain laws. We don't think that, and there's certain models we can create mathematically to describe those things. That, for example, if we throw a ball up and it comes down, we don't just say God made it happen. Okay, we believe that there's actual laws that God made that are causing those things to happen. And in those areas of science, there's pretty much no disagreement between, say, the Christian worldview and the naturalistic worldview. Where the divergence comes, I think, mostly is in this area where you can't readily reproduce the experiment. If we could go back in time and recreate the initial conditions and prove abiogenesis happened through purely naturalistic means, or went back in time and showed these things, and could do it over and over and over again in a time machine, I don't think there would be any debate. The problem is that we can't do that, and that's where, to some extent, I think what ends up happening in my discussions with people who are atheists, especially, is that I put my evidence out for why I believe this worldview. He puts out his evidence, and it's 21 moves to checkmate, or not checkmate, stalemate. And then it's like, okay, now we got to examine the presuppositions, which goes kind of to where, what Jason was talking about before.
Okay. So I've been taking notes. There's a lot of things that I can address, but I'm going to try to be pithy and conversational. It seems like the core of what we're talking about in the philosophy of science is what is being addressed, what can be addressed as instrumentalism versus realism, right? And for people that are watching that are unfamiliar with these terms, scientific realism is the notion that the evidences that are in the hypotheses and the theories of the paradigms of each of the, and that was a very layered sentence right there, of the different fields of science reflect reality. It is what is real. Scientific evidence is what reality is, right? That's that stance. Instrumentalism is, well, reality consists of a lot of different things, and one of the ways to look at it is with the instrument of science. And the results of the instrument of science should be taken in a larger and more robust sphere of what reality is. Right? It seems that the arguments that I've heard are coming from the notion that an atheist thinks all atheists think. Oh, let me not phrase it like that. Your arguments are against scientific realism. Right. Whereas all you need to do is shift your philosophy to science as an instrument, and the things that you're talking about, they're not really arguments against it, right? So let me give you an example. Science as an instrument has criteria, right? The example that I use is a football bat, right? There's no such thing as a football bat. Science is an instrument to give natural explanations to natural phenomena. Let's call that football. Supernatural explanations use supernatural variables to explain any phenomena. Let's call that baseball. There's no such thing as a football bat, right? Combining the supernatural explanations with the natural explanations means that you're entering a game with one set of rules while that game follows a different set of rules. Does that make it right or better or whatever? No, it's just that's how the instrument is used, right? A hammer is used to drive in nails. It can be used as a coffee table leg, but that's a misapplication of that instrument. A rake is used to rake leaves. You could stir your coffee with it, but that's a misuse of that instrument. In your toolbox of what is important to answer certain questions about reality, use a hammer to drive in a nail, use a screwdriver to drive in a screw. Don't use a screwdriver on a nail, and don't use a hammer on a screw. It's really that simple from my perspective, because depending on the topic within science, in some areas I'm a realist up to a point, and then in other areas I'm an instrumentalist. I hope that made sense.
Yeah. Then, quick question then. So, what you're saying then is that I'm trying to unpack that a little bit. Are you saying that
you let me talk for a long time, so that's your fault.
Is what you're saying that like for example, in a Christian worldview, we presume that the natural laws are in effect pretty much almost all of the time. There's been some very distinct times in history where, from a say Christian worldview, we believe that God intervened or broke those laws. But however, we don't have any way to we assume that the laws are going to be in effect pretty much all the time, and therefore that's the method that we're using to go forward. Is that kind of what I'm trying to figure out how to go ahead?
Ask your question one more time. Like, if you could fit it on a bumper sticker, how would you phrase it?
Yeah. So, are you saying that the Christian is trying to use is always viewing things through a supernatural lens?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm the only atheist in my lab. So, I mean, Christians make wonderful scientists, right? But in the science that I'm pursuing and what is commonly understood as science, there's a methodological naturalism, and that's not necessarily a criteria, but yeah, all right. To answer your question, you could provide answers as a Christian using supernatural variables. That's not what's understood as science currently. You could use the label of science, but that's a little bit different. In talking about methodological naturalism, there's a couple different approaches, at least a couple different approaches. Some people would say you shouldn't allow approaches that violate methodological naturalism into science. So let's use the Olympics as an example. People that don't use methodological naturalism shouldn't even be allowed in the Olympics. They're not playing by the rules. There's another belief that, please, use whatever method you want. If you think that you have a robust methodological supernaturalism and you can provide models and theories that are just as explanatory and predictively powerful, you're allowed into the Olympics. But as it has gone so far within the realm of science, the people who are allowed into those Olympics don't win medals. The gold, silver, and bronze go towards the people with natural that use methodological naturalism, that provide natural explanations for natural phenomena. I'm not saying that I adhere to that last one. I just spent more time talking about it. So I think that kind of addresses, like, you can come up with an alternate explanation using supernatural variables. Currently, that model doesn't have a lot of capital in what is known as science. So do with that what you will. You might say that the rules are rigged against supernatural variables, or this, that, or the other, or you might reframe what is currently considered scientific to be supernatural. This is what's going on.
So Andrew, I think, dropped off for just a little bit, so I'll interact with that briefly. So, you said basically methodological naturalism is currently the only game in town, basically, and if
no, it's not the only game in town.
Well, it's the one that you said is currently most permitted into the Olympics.
It's the one that's been the most pragmatic. It's the one that's given the most robust predictive and explanatory power to theories.
So the question I would have for that is why is that the correct one, and how does methodological naturalism account for laws that govern the universe? So, for example, you have to assume these laws within methodological naturalism. You have to assume that they exist and that they're. You have to assume induction, for example. But how does methodological naturalism account for the laws that they have to acknowledge and they even investigate? How do they account for those laws within that assumed methodology? Why is because here, as often creationism or biblical supernaturalism is misrepresented. It's said, well, everything that happens is just simply God doing it. If a ball drops, it's because God pushes it down. No, we actually believe there are laws that govern the universe. We even have Jeremiah 31. We have Genesis 8:22. That God is the one who has established these natural laws, and laws come from a governor, one who institutes them, and that biblical supernaturalism can not only account for the naturalistic laws by which we can then do empirical science, but and then methodological naturalism, which I believe is right now really the main game that is permitted within the scientific realm. But from my opinion, it is simply assumed as the best game in town, and it's not proven to be the best game in town. And where I say it's not the best game in town is because it cannot even account for the laws that it has to rely on in order to be able to do methodological science.
Okay, so science in and of itself is not philosophy, and you're asking theological and philosophical questions of science.
So the scientific process is not a philosophical system?
It borrows from philosophy. There is a separate field called the philosophy of science. Science, but what we consider philosophy, scientists don't sit around and think about abduction, induction, deduction, all that stuff. The method of science is laid and underpinned by philosophy, but it's not the philosophical endeavor that you just put forth. So
there's no philosophical assumptions within scientific inquiry?
Oh goodness, yes, but they're assumptions, right? And admittedly, sure. So if you want to consider a paradigm theory.
So is naturalism? Let me interact with that real quick though. So is naturalism actual science, or is it a philosophy?
Is it science, or it depends on how you define it. Right. Naturalism, there is naturalism, which is a philosophy, which I think is like the Jamesian, Deweyan branch of philosophy. But once again, nature within science is, I'll admit that it is an assumption. And to answer your question, what accounts for methodological naturalism being the game in town, what proves that methodological naturalism is effective, is the proof is in the pudding. It is that the theories that are generated from it have predictive and explanatory power, but they're going to change, and we accept that. The theories, that is.
I believe we have another person has joined the broadcast here. Evolution False. Welcome to the broadcast. Did you want to interact a little bit with Christopher?
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Try to mute and unmute yourself. Sometimes that works.
All right, how about now?
Perfect.
Yep,
It worked.
Oh, okay, good. Now, you said that science is not philosophy. Isn't science a division of natural philosophy?
It is born out of natural philosophy. So the
Yeah.
term scientist came into existence, I think, in the early 19th century. And before that, like Newton wasn't a scientist. He was considered a natural philosopher.
Yeah. So how can you disassociate science from philosophy when the core foundation of science is the uniformity of nature?
Oh, I'm not different. What's the word that you use? Disconnecting? I'm not disconnecting them. I think that science relies on philosophy. Right. That doesn't mean that it
Okay,
is
then it's
philosophy.
inherently philosophical then.
I agree that it's philosophical.
Okay, good.
Okay. I think that was different than what you said earlier, Christopher.
No, I
Well,
said that it is not.
different.
I said that it is not philosophy.
Sure it is.
Okay. I see
Okay,
it differently.
let me ask you this question. Is the uniformity of nature the bedrock foundation of empiricism?
Bedrock and foundation. The uniformity of nature is an assumption that is made for the theories that are generated.
That's not an answer to the question I asked.
It is an answer. You just don't like it.
Is the uniformity of nature the bedrock philosophical assumption of science?
You have a lot of qualifying terms. The bedrock foundation of the philosophy of empiricism.
Let me ask it this way, Christopher. Could you do science if you didn't assume uniformity?
Probably not, and depending on the field.
Okay, could you tell me how you could do any empirical science without the starting assumption of the uniformity of nature?
Let's say that I can't. So
Okay, good. So that means that science is inherently from the get-go philosophical.
Hey, can we? I want to pause here for a little bit, Christopher. I think I feel like we're ganging up on you.
Oh no, this is fine.
I don't want to. I
I'm
mean, as
ganging
long as
up
you're
on
fine
them.
with
We're
it.
being very polite.
No. I understand that, but there's 3 Christians in here, and there's only 1 atheist. So,
so long as it doesn't turn into like interrupty, overlapping conversation, I'm
Yeah.
fine.
I just wanted to make sure you're fine with it, Christopher.
Oh yeah.
So far, there's been no atheists that have joined, and so I just want to make sure you're cool with it. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Proceed. I just wanted to make sure you were fine, Christopher.
So, to your point, evolution. Do you prefer to be called evolution false, or do you have a?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
You can
Once
just call
again-
me EF.
EF. Okay. I wasn't claiming that science is not philosophical. I said that it wasn't philosophy, right? Philosophy is a field separate from science. Science is on the back of philosophy, right? But it is not philosophy proper. So if your questions are to get answers from me about whether science is philosophical, my answer will always be yes. Is it the same as? Is it the field of philosophy? No, it is not. That's the statement that I made. I said science is philosophy.
In Christopher's defense, I think what he was hitting at is that, when you're doing science actively, you're not thinking about the philosophical underpinnings of what you're doing while you're doing it. So when I'm in a lab taking data, I'm not thinking about the philosophical underpinnings of what I'm doing. Is that kind of what you're going with that, or?
Yeah.
So Christopher, you're an atheist.
I am.
Okay, how do you define atheism?
Atheism is not having a belief in God.
Okay, good. Okay, so you're defining atheism as a lack of belief?
No, it's also an active belief. It is having justified and warranted beliefs that there is no God.
Okay, so atheism does the way you define atheism, is it propositional?
What do you mean by propositional?
Okay, is it a mere state of mind where you have an absence of an affirmation of God, or is it propositional in that there is no God?
I'm going to go with that there is no God. I think
Okay.
I think the lacking God or lacktheist position or irreligious or a-religious or whatever, I think that's a little bit separate than atheism. I think that atheism is a positive claim. If that
Okay,
helps.
good. Could you give me one good reason that atheism is true as you have expressed it as a proposition?
Good reason to whom?
To anyone.
I don't know everyone. So I have reasons that make sense to me. If you're asking me why I believe what I believe, I'll go through them with you.
What are the reasons that make sense to you, Christopher?
The question is, can you give me a one good reason that atheism is true as expressed as a proposition?
Atheism is true. I think that we're having two different conversations. So I have a belief. That belief is atheistic, that there is no God. I can give you reasons why I believe what I believe. But if you're asking me to give a definition of why atheism is true and should be adhered to by everybody, that's a different conversation.
That's not what I said. I said you have presented
true.
You have presented atheism as being propositional, as opposed to a mere state of mind. Is that correct?
I have to admit you're using terms that I'm not familiar with. So I'm saying that atheism is a positive claim. That's the language that resonates with me.
That's a proposition then.
Okay.
Unless you're merely referring to your mental state. Now, atheism is the proposition.
So when you say proposition, do you mean a proposition about reality and its truth value of comporting with reality?
I'm saying that a proposition is a positive statement about a certain state of affairs, as opposed to a mere state of mind where you have an absence of belief.
Yeah, I have to admit you're using terms that I'm just not familiar with.
I'm not using very technical terms.
Regardless, there are terms that I'm not familiar with interacting.
Okay. Do you know what a proposition is?
Not formally.
Okay. Well, I'm just using it in loose sense. By the way, I'd like to ask the host to remove the person who just came in. He's a known stalker of mine, and they just come in to disrupt the conversation or not broadcast him. Excuse me about that. So, Christopher, is it your position that there is no God?
It is my belief that there is no God.
Okay, but that's propositional, correct?
I guess, once again, you're...
Okay, good, that there is no God.
I'm proposing, I guess, in the loose sense, I am proposing that there is no God.
Okay, good. Can you give me one good reason that is true?
Which God?
We're not discussing personas of God. In fact, that is kind of in all due respect, a dodge answer, because I could give you a minimalist definition of God here. A minimalist definition I could give you for God is God could be defined as a non-contingent entity that possesses the attributes of consciousness and intelligence and produce the initial conditions of the universe.
Okay.
Okay, and that would encompass a whole range of God concepts, such as the Abrahamic, monotheistic concepts. I'm not really discussing any particular persona. I'm just talking about a minimalist definition of a God, a non-contingent and intelligent entity that produced the initial conditions of the universe.
Okay. Do you consider it interactive?
It might be. Doesn't have to be.
Okay. So my justifications for a minimal God, like a prime mover, like a deistic God, would be different than any particular interactive God. So that's why I asked. It's not a dodge. Depending on the answer that you give, depending on how you want me to address it, I will definitely give. I'm not dodging giving an answer. I just want to give an answer that is most accurate to your question. So a deistic God is much more difficult to provide proofs for. Abrahamic gods, I have a different set of justifications that I would use. So
okay, so I'm still waiting for one good reason that there is no God.
Well, the fact that you keep saying good reason, good to you, because I'm not obligated to cater my understanding of my beliefs or how I understand reality to what you consider a good. I mean, you could walk away from this conversation thinking that I don't have good justifications for atheism, and I will sleep fine.
I'm not really interested in a bad reason. So is there a good reason that there is no God?
Yeah, it's the fourth time you've asked that.
It's really not a complicated question.
It's more complicated than you think. Good to whom? I have I have reasons that are good to me, but they may not be good to you.
Well, just give one of your reasons.
Yeah. How did you come to the conclusion that there is no God?
That's a long story. I don't see any evidence for it. Depending on the God, where I look for where there should be evidence, I don't see it. I acknowledge that there could be a God. I just think that that possibility has a low probability. I think that alternate explanations for things that are more naturalistic and not supernaturalistic resonate with me more.
Okay, so you said you believe there's no God.
I do.
Okay, good. So now you seem to be kind of vacillating between atheism and agnosticism.
I've been called an agnostic before. I mean, I use the label.
You said there's no God.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this question.
Whoa! This is not an interrogation, brother. So
I'm not interrogating you.
Well, you're asking a lot of questions in rapid succession that I have yet to answer. So let's take it a piece at a time. I might have a looser definition, right, of atheism. I gave a definition based on my belief, not objective fact. God doesn't exist. That's not my position. So you could call me agnostic. My definition of atheism could be another person's agnosticism. So that's what you're dealing with.
Okay, so now you're an agnostic?
It's not that now I'm agnostic. You can use whatever label you're interested in. But so long as we talk about my beliefs, that'll be a more fruitful conversation, I think.
I'm still waiting for an answer to the question. One good reason why there's no God.
I gave 3.
Okay. Okay. Is your argument then the absence of evidence is evidence of absence?
No.
Okay. Well, then when you said there's no evidence for God and you conclude there is none because there's no evidence, that's the absence of evidence is evidence of absence.
I accept that you see it that way.
No, that's exactly what it is.
Well, Christopher, isn't it from time to time? Didn't you say that given some gods, there are instances in which evidence of absence is?
Let's just continue the conversation here.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Oh, I see the point that you're making.
You said there's no evidence, therefore there's no God.
There is no evidence. There's okay. All right, I'll give that to you.
Okay, good. Then that entails the absence of evidence is evidence of absence.
Okay.
Is that your position?
In some instances.
Okay, good. Then you're going to have to you're going to have to specify that if a God existed, then you would necessarily see X. Notice the key word is necessarily, right? And in the absence of observing X, therefore you conclude there's no God. So if a God existed, what would you necessarily see?
Miracles.
Why would you necessarily see miracles if there was a God?
Depending on your definition of that God, I'm going to go with Abrahamic.
I already gave that definition.
I know, and those are your definitions, and I accept that those are the definitions that you have. But I get the weird impression. Jason and Andrew and I were having a charitable conversation. I feel that your questions are asked in bad faith, that you're trying to corner me and challenge me in a way that is meant to score points. And I'm not really interested in that kind of conversation. That violates my social contract of what is socially appropriate.
Okay, well, those are all nice words, but I asked you to give me a good reason. The reason that you've given me for atheism.
And this pushing forward with things that you've already asked, that I feel that I've answered, is the exact violation of the social contract that I'm offering.
What violation has occurred? You had told me that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence in some cases. Now, if that is your good reason, then that would mean that if there was a God, then we would necessarily see X, and in the absence of X, you can conclude, according to your reasoning, that there is no God. Now, what would X necessarily be in your view?
I don't know.
So then you actually don't have a good reason then for atheism.
As I mentioned before, if you walk away from this conversation thinking that I don't have good reason to hold the beliefs that I do, that's fine. So let's just cut to the chase. What is your goal in asking these questions?
Well, I wanted to find out from you what your good reason was that where you came to the conclusion that there was no God. You told me.
Did I claim that I had good reason?
Please? Can I finish, please?
Sure.
Okay, good. You told me your one good reason why there was no God is because there's no evidence for God. You confirmed that your position was, for your atheism, that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. I asked you what the evidence would necessarily be if a God existed, and you can't stipulate that. Therefore, your statement that there is the absence of evidence is evidence of absence really doesn't have any substance to it as a good reason that there is no God.
Well, I accept that you don't find it a good reason.
I want to jump in here for a second. Christopher, I want to ask this question here. Just is if you did encounter evidence for God, would you worship God?
So the question. So this seems like a different version of the question. What would it take for me to believe in God? And I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
No, I mean if you because you said that you just haven't seen evidence for God, but if you were given evidence for God, would you still worship Him? And I'm speaking specifically of the Christian God here. That's the only God that I defend.
So what I would say is, and it would be the answer that I give to the other form of the question, is for me to believe in God, I can't be reasoned into it. So seeing evidences and observational and all that stuff. The only thing that would, from my perspective, that I understand, would make me believe in God would be personal revelation, and I have yet to experience that. If I had personal revelation and knew it to be true in such a way that it couldn't be false, that this is the Holy Spirit whose finger touched me, and that God existed, then yes, everything that I perceive would be filtered through that lens, and I have yet to experience that. So
let me jump kind of all the way back. I mean, we're going back now about 45 minutes ago, but where we were talking about Wayback Machine here, where you mentioned that you don't have to justify your presuppositions, but I say that those presuppositions that you are adhering to and that you are holding to are only grounded in God. Is that not a personal revelation of God to you?
Say that one more time.
So those presuppositions that you said that you didn't need to justify, that you said, for example, you would just assume morality, you assume induction, you just assume a lot of these things, but you don't feel that you don't value having to justify them. Do you not see those presuppositions as God's personal revelation to you?
No.
Okay. So my point would be simply that I think God has already personally revealed Himself to you, and that's you just don't like. I would say that you can't give me a rational reason. You just don't prefer that.
I agree that I can't give you a rational reason, because I don't think that I can be I don't think that people can get reasoned into religious belief. Right? And in the same respect, they can't be reasoned out of it. So when I say personal revelation, I'm talking about a subjective, phenomenological experience. And so evidences, in talking about them, I don't think that they have as much value in trying to support one worldview over another. Either you see things one way or you see them another way. What differentiates those two ways of seeing things is personal experience. So by that I mean specifically like phenomenological, experiential subjectiveness.
So is atheism, your position of atheism, is it something that you have been reasoned into?
No.
So you would admit that you simply assume it's true. Can you give me the reason why you personally, if you can't give me any, if it wasn't something that you were reasoned into, why do you hold to it?
I wasn't reasoned into it where like I sat down and with a philosopher and broke down the rationality or irrationality of it. It just let's see. I guess it has to do with my development and my education and oh, let me rephrase that. I didn't mean to say that because I have education that my opinion is more educated. That wasn't where I was going with that. But you know, after taking some comparative religion courses, the fact that I study psychology, it just resonated with me more that there are psychological and natural explanations for things than supernatural. My ability to adhere to the existence of supernaturalism withered.
The question I have is when you earlier said that there's no evidence for God,
mm-hmm.
What in your mind do you think would be the evidence necessarily that would be if a God did exist that you say is missing?
Okay, so I'll just fall back on what I said a minute ago, where I don't think that talking about evidences is a fruitful path, because if I did have personal revelation in the way that I just described it, then everything around me would be evidence for God.
Well, you told me earlier
mm-hmm.
that your good reason that there was no God is that there was no evidence for God. Now that presupposes that you would have in your mind what the evidence of God would necessarily be. Yet you have not stipulated what the evidence would necessarily be in order to conclude that there's not a God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the absence of stipulating what the evidence would necessarily be,
mm-hmm.
then the statement there is no God because there's no evidence would just be a slogan.
Okay.
Well, I think can I ask?
I've permitted Jack to jump in here, so Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is that in order for there to be evidence for a God or for anything, right, it would have to be the case that that the hypothesis in question generates predictive expectations, right? So we can say there's evidence for a star if there's bright light observed, if there's intense heat observed, and so on. Those are things that we would expect if there were a star in some given region of space-time. And I think the problem is that positing a God doesn't actually generate any predictive expectations. And given that that's the case, there can't actually be any evidence for it. Now, if that's the case, it follows that the only way there could actually be justification for belief in God would be if there were a good a priori argument for the existence of God. Right? Now, I don't happen to think that there is such an argument, so I don't think belief in God can actually be rationally justified, even if the God hypothesis is constructed in such a way that it's logically coherent. Right? I'm not sure that there really are any logically coherent God hypotheses, but if there were one, you could believe in it, but you couldn't have any justification for belief in it.
Okay, so Christopher, I had to ask you if you could give me what the evidence would necessarily be if a God existed, and you haven't shared with us what that would be.
Mm-hmm.
Since you haven't shared that with us, how can there...
You've redirected the conversation to this question at least 4 times, and at least twice I've said that speaking of evidences, which is the question that you're asking, is not a fruitful discussion. I don't think that evidences that I give from my perspective you're going to find persuasive, and I don't think that evidence that you would give from your perspective I would find persuasive. And the core of that difference is the subjective experience that I talked about. So trying to redirect the conversation for me to answer that question...
I'm not redirecting the conversation. I think you're feeling very uncomfortable. You didn't mind when I asked you what your atheism entailed, and now that I've asked you to support your contention that there is no evidence, You're now saying it's unfruitful. I think what you're doing is a very polite dodge to support your own contention.
But I supported it. I supported the contention that there's no evidence, and you haven't responded to me, Evolution.
Hey Jack, let Christopher and Jack here, or Evolution, engage here for a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'll just say one more thing, Christopher. Okay. I think it's clear to me, and probably others that are watching, that you are being very polite, but I think it's pretty clear that you're uncomfortable in supporting your own contention that there is no God because there is no evidence for God. And like I said, and I'll be very brief, that entails, or that presupposes, that there would necessarily be evidence if a God existed. When I ask you what that necessary evidence is, you can't seem to say. Therefore, your claim there is no God because there is no evidence for God is an unsubstantiated statement and really just turns out to be a slogan.
Okay. As I've already laid out what it is that I believe. Right? I believe what I believe because it's the version of the reality that I experience that resonates with me most. If you don't think that I have good reasons for it, that is perfectly fine.
No, it's not that I think that. It's that your prime contention as to the reason why there is no God is because there is no evidence. That when I ask you to specify that, what the evidence would necessarily be, you don't want to answer that. So actually, you don't have a good reason.
This is the third time that I've said it is fine if you don't think that I have a good reason.
No, it's not that I don't think that. You don't have a good reason.
I accept that you believe that.
No, you're being very polite. That's comes across a little bit smarmy. You have said,
and you're coming across very aggressive.
I'd like to finish without being interrupted.
I'm sure that you would, but you're saying the same thing over and over again.
I'd like to finish without being interrupted. I'm being polite.
I'm sure that you would.
I didn't interrupt you, Christopher. Okay.
Listen.
Okay, but Christopher,
that does not mean that I'm obligated to hear you say the same.
I'd like to finish without being interrupted.
I'm sure that you would.
Okay, you're interrupting me.
We'll leave it up to the moderator.
Okay, good. It is up to the moderators, and I'd like to finish. Okay. Now
I'll let you finish. Let's get the conversation moving on, though.
Okay, I'll just say one more thing. He was perfectly comfortable in defining and describing his atheism and giving a good reason. Once he was asked a follow-up question to support his alleged good reason that there is no God because there's no evidence, when he was asked a question, what would the evidence for God necessarily be in order to conclude there is no God? All of a sudden he feels uncomfortable in answering that question. And it is not that I believe that you have not actually given a good reason. You have not. Okay? So your response saying, without stipulating what the evidence would necessarily be, without stipulating that, then the statement there is no God because there's no evidence for God actually is just a slogan. It's a slogan that doesn't have any support or content to it.
I accept that my answers don't meet your criteria.
Yeah, okay. You know what? Yeah, that's a childish response.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to. Andy is back and he wants to interact a little bit with you, Christopher. So I'm going to just mute everyone else in the conversation right now, and we'll allow Andy. So Andy, go ahead and jump back in. I know that you were.
So Christopher, are you looking for a experience to validate God?
Well, I'm not looking for one, but the only answer that I could give as to why, what would make me change my mind from the belief that there isn't a God to the belief that there is a God, the only answer that I can think of would be personal revelation through subjective experience.
So what you're asking for is perhaps an experience, something, I'm not trying to, I use this term of kind of a biblical proportion, something like Moses in the burning bush or something like that. Not necessarily. I'm not trying to be snarky or something, but
no, I think
you're looking for something like that.
Well, once again, it's not necessarily that I'm looking for it, but if I were to have a life experience that made it clear that what was happening is I was being touched by the hand of the Holy Spirit or God, and I'm just using those terms colloquially and rhetorically. I don't literally need to see a hand touching me or whatever. But that experience was caused by a God that let me know that there is a God that exists. Then that would completely change my perspective on how I saw reality, and what I saw previously as evidence against would probably be flipped to evidences for, and yeah, that.
I would like to engage Christopher if that's possible.
Quick question, real quick. Would, if God did exist, would you expect him to give you this experience or not? In other words, do you think God is obligated to give you this experience if he exists?
No.
Okay. So let me ask this then. If he did exist, okay, let me ask it this way. Have you ever asked with the hypothesis, have you ever asked God for this experience?
Not specifically. I was raised Catholic, and you may or may not think that Catholicism is a valid form of Christianity, but I went through the sacraments, and I believed in my heart when I was a believer that God existed, that heaven existed, and hell existed, and all of that. And then, and I don't mean this to sound condescending, but I grew out of it. The experiences of my experiences post high school, post teenage years, based on the things that I studied and the things that resonated with me, led me away from a belief in the supernatural or God.
So if God provided you this experience, are you confident you would see that experience as God, for lack of a better word, answering your prayer, or would you explain away? I'm trying to ask what you would do.
I think that's a good question.
If you had that experience, would you go, oh, maybe I was hallucinating, or maybe that was just my imagination, or would you really truly be open to that experience?
Well, depending on the experience, and the answer to your question is yes. I'd have to pay attention to it, because if I had that experience, that revelation would show me that there is a God, and whatever it is that he wanted me to do, I would then be obligated to do. I mean, right? Because I'm looking for truth. I'm looking to not delude myself about reality. So if that experience happened, and all of a sudden I realized that the way that I've lived my life up to that point was going in a direction against the existence of this God who wants it to go in a different direction, I would like to think that I would pay attention to it.
So you're pretty convinced that if you had this experience, and again, the magnitude of it would be subjective, that you would change your mind. And if Scripture is true, when people have had this experience, which if Scripture is true, people have had this experience you're seeking. Mm-hmm. It was quite jarring. It really messed with them, messed with their life, messed with who they were as a person, etc. Talk about somebody like Paul or Moses or something like that. Are you ready, if that experience happened, to make those sort of changes or not? Would you be open to a life-changing experience?
I would like to think so, but
okay.
I can't really say for definite whether that's the case. I would like to think that I would run into a burning building to save lives. I don't have a burning building next to me with lives to save to test that.
So this would be my thought to you, is if that's what would convince you, I think you should start asking for it.
I'm not open to it.
I mean, I think you should be, well, just a word of advice, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I would think that you would be praying for this experience. Praying is not the right word, but from your worldview, but seeking this experience, asking for this experience, imploring God to reveal this, right?
Mm. Well, I don't place enough value on it, right? As much as I value looking for truth and having a worldview and position and perceptions that comport with reality, I don't see the value in specifically looking for the Abrahamic God, seeking it, to use your words. That's there's too many beers to drink and too much bass to play.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I think you asked for Shanna to join in on the conversation. Shanna, did you want to join in?
Yes, I did. Hello. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Now you said, Christopher,
Nice to meet you.
that Shanna was a deist?
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too, Chris. Nice to meet you.
Shanna's my girlfriend.
Oh, okay. Oh, so
Yes.
she has a different view than you, Christopher. She's a deist?
Oh yeah, we fist fight about it constantly.
Okay.
Oh, goodness. Him and his atheism, let me tell you.
If you want to hear somebody bust my chops about atheism, you should hear the conversations I have with Shanna.
So, Shanna, since you're a deist, what evidence do you have for your deism?
Oh, wow, you are right to the point, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
I like it. So, to touch on just some of them, a lot of them would be very similar, not so dissimilar from some of the Christian evidences, except I don't go that extra step, right? So there's the moral arguments, there's the argument from consciousness, there's DNA, there's inference of the best explanation, so on and so forth. You catch my drift?
Okay, give one of them.
In full? No, I don't want to do that. That's boring.
Okay.
And we're not going to disagree on any of that.
So how do you know that a general deity is the foundation for morality?
Well, no is not really a word that I would use because I think it's a useless word. But I do believe that that's the case because I think that's what the evidence suggests, and that best explains the set of data and the facts that we have in reality.
Okay, so I thought earlier you said you had an argument for it. So now it's just a belief that you have. It's not a belief based upon an actual argument, something that you know. You just think it might be true.
No, that's not what I said. Be nice. So, okay. So when we hear arguments, we find them compelling. Then a belief develops from that, right? That's how belief formation works. So if I hear these arguments and I'm compelled by them, and then I look at the counter arguments, I'm not compelled by them, and so on and so forth, as philosophy goes, then a belief will form. Against my will, a belief will form. Right? So my beliefs are based on arguments that I found compelling. So it's not just a belief. Either I have just a belief or I have an argument. Those two things go together.
Well,
One gave birth to the other.
Yeah, I was a little confused by because you said something earlier. You said it was not you didn't like the word no, right? So
Right.
So do you know that there is a God, or do you?
How are you using that word? Let's do that.
Well, knowledge. No is knowledge. Do you have knowledge that there is a God?
See, that's another funny thing with knowledge. I mean, how are you using that word?
Okay. My question would be: do you know that that you have a belief in a general deity?
I know that I have a belief. Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay. Well, then you seem to like the word no.
Well, it's the whole concept of knowledge itself, right? It gets used in very strange ways, very tricky, sticky ways, more often than not. Right, so do I know that I'm sitting in my chair right now? I sure do. Okay. Do I know that my Jeep's sitting outside? Well, I think I know. It's what I think I know. Right? Do I know that there's a creator, as in that is now a fact in reality that must be accepted by all? Of course not. That's an absurdity. Right? Okay. Then we get a certainty thing where people think that a certain amount of certainty is currency, and then it buys you knowledge, and once you have bought knowledge with enough certainty, you win the game. But that's not how it really works.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you're not sure if there really is a God, though. So it sounds like you're more in agnostic camp, same as Christopher.
Well, if that's the definition you want to go with.
Okay. Well, I was just curious on if you were. I find deism to be indefensible. Against really anything, against Christian theism. I think deism is just as indefensible as atheism or agnosticism. Because it's just it assumes something, but it cannot account. For example, the Christian as a Christian, I have special revelation from God, and that is my presupposition. I don't make any apology for that. Mm-hmm. So my question for anybody that holds to any sort of deistic position, is how do you even account for that? What sort of foundation do you have to stand on? You're basically just creating a form of deity, or as we as Christians would call an idol in your own mind, something that's more, and this comes from my worldview, but something that suits your the things that you like, something that maybe that you prefer. So you kind of create a god that you prefer, but you can't really provide any sort of justification for that particular god. You simply just assume him.
Oh, you just said a lot of things that aren't true.
Okay.
You directly contradict what I just said.
Okay. So go ahead, and what are those?
Well, I don't assume anything, right? You're a presuppositionalist. I am not. You seem like an intelligent adult, right? You understand that what you're doing is an apologetic for Christianity. You've admitted that freely, right?
Whoa, I want to jump in there. You say you don't assume anything?
I don't assume that there's a God. I assume tons of things.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, obviously we're going to have different approaches to the beliefs that we have, right? So, when you want to...
Can I interact with that just real briefly? Because you said you don't assume there is a God. Now, you do say that there is one, though, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So can you give me your argument for this God that you believe in?
Well, as I outlined earlier, there's many, many arguments that I find compelling and convincing that the universe was created.
Okay. Can you provide one of those for me?
I listed them earlier and then explicitly said I'm not going to launch into the full-blown arguments.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay, this is from my perspective. So let's say somebody asked me, well, I believe that my uncle is in Indiana right now, and they ask, well, why do you believe that? Well, I have lots of arguments and a lot of reasons why, but I just won't tell you. So I'm
okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So
yeah,
you're making an assertion, but
I guess
I'd like to get a specific.
What I was expecting, I guess, was a little bit of charitability and understanding that you and I both know what these arguments are when I named them, and that you're not going to argue against them.
Well, okay, but you do understand I'm a presuppositionalist, right? So I don't accept the standard theistic proofs. Like, I don't make the teleological argument. I don't make the cosmological argument.
Of course you don't make them, but I mean, do you think that they're bad arguments?
They're not arguments that I would make.
That's fair. That's fair. But I mean,
because
do you think that they're false or bad arguments?
There's issues with many of them. I personally like the ontological argument. If there's any argument outside of presuppositionalism that I like the ontological argument, but I don't use that because, and here's the reason why. I believe God is the foundation of logic. I believe that logic, everything comes from God, because Scripture tells me that it does. All things come from God. So if I use an epistemological system based upon the laws of logic to judge an argument of whether God exists or not, let's take even the ontological argument or the cosmological argument or the argument for morality. If I take that and I use that to judge the existence of either not God or God, then I am saying that there are laws and there is an epistemological system that exists autonomously outside of God by which I can then judge his existence. And as a Christian, I can't do that. God judges me. I don't judge him. And so I think all the arguments outside of just presupposing the validity of the Bible, which then gives a coherent worldview, to use any of the argument is to judge God, and is also to assume that there are things that exist outside of him by which he can be judged. And so that's the assumption of neutrality, and I don't believe any of us are neutral. I don't believe you're neutral. I don't believe Christopher's neutral. I'm not neutral. We all come to the table with things that we assume ahead of time by which we then judge evidence and arguments. But I don't believe that you can actually make an argument, any sort of argument at all, without presupposing the God of the Bible, because you can't account for the laws of logic outside of him.
That's interesting. So let me see if I understand a particular point that you made in there. So you presuppose the validity of the Bible and the existence of this specific God before, so that would have to be the first thing that you do, right? Because under that, then it would be almost blasphemous for you to evaluate any of the arguments to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, I look at the arguments, but I don't assume that I have an epistemological system outside of that exists independent of God by which I can judge him. I can't, because I can't even account for epistemology, and I cannot account for logic without God. So it would be absolutely foolish for me to judge God based upon something that I assume from my own subject creatureliness. For example, you would agree that you're not omniscient. Would that be correct?
Well, today. You should catch me on a Tuesday, though.
Okay. So if you're not omniscient,
she makes me admit that she's omniscient all the time.
I believe
only on Tuesdays, Chris.
Tuesdays, that's right.
So if you're not omniscient, if you don't know all things, how is it that you, for example, if you're going to judge an argument, let's take I don't know what your favorite argument is, but let's say you like the cosmological argument. So do you not have to admit that in order to look at the cosmological argument, that you have to presuppose that the laws of logic are absolutes by which you can even make a syllogistic argument, for example, like the cosmological argument, right? You would have to assume those are absolutes, right?
I mean, that's absolute's a really big word.
Well,
but I see what you're saying, so I'll go with that. Yeah. I trust that logic is serving me correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, from your deistic position, you're going to struggle with saying absolutes. But the thing is, you can't live your life that way. And so when you look at an argument you're looking at like the cosmological argument, for example, you're judging it. You're assuming that there are laws of logic by which you can measure this argument and therefore conclude God, right?
Correct.
So my question for you would be from your position of not being omniscient. You don't have all knowledge. How do you know that those particular laws, how is it that you have knowledge of those particular laws as absolutes? Because if you don't have omniscience, there is knowledge that exists outside of the scope of your own mind, right? I mean, you would agree with that, right? So how do you know that in the knowledge that you don't possess, that there isn't evidence that would show that the laws of logic are not absolutes? How do you know that?
Well, I don't.
Exactly. So, but you assume them to be absolutes. In fact, you do in such a way that you even judge arguments for God based upon them. But my thing is you're simply assuming that, and you're assuming them as absolutes. You're working with them as if they are absolutes, but you can't account for it. Now, here's the thing. I believe that you do know them as absolutes, but this is why I believe that you know them as absolutes. There's only two options. Either for you to know, for any creature to know and have knowledge of absolutes, he would either A, have to be omniscient, or he would have to have revelation from one who is omniscient. So when you use the laws of logic to judge arguments, you are revealing that God has revealed these absolutes to you in order that you can function within his reality.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Well, I know you don't agree with that, but you can't account for your knowledge of them any other way other than God revealed them to you.
I can't account for of logic?
Yes, the laws of logic. How do you account for the laws of logic if God did not reveal them to you?
Now, when you say account,
justify.
Unpack that a little bit. Justify, okay. So the way that I would justify my use of logic is its reliability in the past, right?
Okay, but that's begging the question. That's assuming.
Which question is it begging?
Well, you're assuming its reliability in the past. So how do you know it will be reliable in the future?
Well, I don't know, but it does make it a warranted assumption. It does make it a warranted belief.
Only if you, that's begging the question though, because if you simply assume that it will be that way in the future, because it has been that way in the past, I ask you, well, how do you know? Is it going to be that way in the future? And you say, well, it's always just been that way. Okay, well, that's begging the question. That's not actually answering. How do you know it will be that way?
Begging? Which question is that begging?
The question that you're begging is, how do you know it will be that way in the future? You didn't give me an answer. It's always been that way in the past.
That is an answer, right? So we use inferences every day.
Are you familiar with Hume?
I'm familiar with Hume.
Okay. You realize Hume undercut all of science by saying that we cannot assume, to assume induction is to beg the question, right?
Right. But as I go through my day-to-day life, and you go through your day-to-day life, and your wife and your children and everyone else's families in this room go through their day-to-day life, they do it anyway, right? So I'm not going to get out of bed every day and question whether or not gravity is still intact, and whether or not I should step on my floor, or that the wood, that the boards are going to hold, and I'm not going to fall through it. Right? Every single day I've ever gotten up, I was able to get up and not fall through my floor or float away and die. Right? So while I do see what you're saying in the sense of I don't know for a fact, therefore I have no reason, nowhere I can plant my little flag. Okay, fine, but it still works day to day, my day-to-day living, and it also works my day-to-day logic and inferences. Right? When I'm driving, I use that logic and those inferences of what's happened before to drive defensively, drive offensively. It's saved my life probably millions of times by now. So while it doesn't buy me that certainty, which then is that currency for that knowledge that you're after, it still works in day-to-day life.
Well, I know it works, but I'm saying that you can't account for it working. You're just saying, well, it works. But that's just pragmatism. Pragmatism simply tells you whether something works, not on exactly how it should work, if that's the way it actually should work. You're just saying that it does work.
Correct.
That doesn't give it any sort of accounting for it.
It doesn't give it an accounting in the sense that you're after, right? So justification is one thing. The way that you're using the word accounting, and then when I asked you to kind of clarify that earlier, you said justification, so I did go ahead and justify it. Now, whether or not you find that justification compelling, that's something that we could discuss, but you're using it in a much heavier sense than you indicated before.
Your justification begs the question, so therefore it would be based upon a logical fallacy.
But I'm a little confused because it seems like by justification you mean something like an inference, right?
Who, me?
No, logical.
Okay.
Explain what you mean.
Well, by justification you mean that one can give an argument, right? And arguments are inferential in form, right? That's what you mean by justify.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. So
well,
I'm asking.
So then there would have to actually be inferential rules, which are presupposed in order to give an argument.
Absolutely, and that was my point.
No, but the problem is that in order to account for them, you'd have to presuppose them to begin with.
Exactly, and that's my point. She is presupposing.
No, but that would mean that everybody is in the same boat, including you, in terms of justification. See, you were trying to say that the atheist or the deist or the non-Christian has no justification for using laws of logic, right, as if the Christian does. But then in order for that to be the case, it would have to be that justification could be given non-circularly. Right?
No, I would agree with this part. No, I can justify the laws of logic from my Christian worldview. Now, if you're going to ask me, how do I justify the existence of God? Because that would be the next question. You would have to go to my foundation, right?
No.
So,
you've agreed. You're getting ahead of yourself. You've agreed that in order to justify laws of logic would themselves have to be presupposed. That would be to argue in a circle. So therefore, it's illegitimate to ask for them to be justified.
No, actually, I asked her to justify induction.
No. Before you said.
Well, let's go back to my actual argument. My actual argument is that I asked her to justify induction. Okay.
I'm not talking about induction.
That's
we can
what I
talk
was
about
talking
that
about.
as well. No, but earlier you said, can you justify?
That is what we're talking about. And so my question is how does she assume that the laws of logic will be the same? I didn't say about the existence of laws of logic. I'm saying that how does she assume that the laws of logic will continue tomorrow as they have been in the past? How does she assume that? And so that is what I asked her to justify. I didn't ask her to justify the laws of logic. Now, I would also ask her to do that.
Well, but if you would ask her to do that, right, it would have to be possible to justify laws of logic. Right?
Absolutely.
Non-circularly. Now, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, God is the justification for it. I'm not appealing back to the laws of logic.
No. You've granted that to offer a justification for laws of logic, you would have to appeal to inferential rules, right? Because to give a justification for the laws of logic is to give an argument. And arguments are governed by inferential rules, right? So inferential rules are themselves laws of logic. So you'd have to presuppose laws of logic in order to give a justification for laws of logic, right?
Logical. You can just sweep this all under the rug just by simply asking Shanna, other than you temporarily assuming the laws of logic, because to speak is to temporarily assume them, how would you, beyond a temporary assumption, account for the laws of logic are absolute and universal, given the parameters of her worldview? That would be the question that you can ask her.
No, that doesn't answer the objection that I'm raising, Evolution. The objection that I'm raising, right, is to ask for a justification for laws of logic, is to ask somebody to give an argument in support of laws of logic.
Okay, right? Shanna, I have a question.
Excuse me, I wasn't done yet.
Jack, that argument does justify the existence of the laws of logic. So that is providing a foundation for them.
How can it justify it without it being a circular argument?
The only circularity is involved in the existence of God. Now, is all ultimate authorities, are they ultimately circular? Yes, that is correct.
You're not following the objection. Let me try to restate it. Right. So you're saying, what is your justification for laws of logic? Let's bracket questions about what it even means to say laws of logic and what have you, right? So you said that what it means to give a justification is to give an argument, right?
No, I said God is. I simply said God is the justification. Now that is.
Well, that's not what you said before when I asked you what you meant.
Okay, logical.
No, it's what I've been repeatedly saying this.
Logical.
Repeatedly saying this.
Logical. Yeah. You are going to get nowhere in the conversation with Jack about this. He employs these strategies all the time, and it goes around and around in circles. No matter what you say, his response will be, see, I don't see how that follows, and then he goes down another rabbit trail. So, Shanna, my question to you, and I would appreciate it that no one interject and lets Shanna speak for herself so as not to obstruct the question. Shanna, other than a temporary assumption of the laws of logic, how, given the parameters of your worldview, could you account for how you would know that the laws of logic are absolute, universal, and invariant?
Okay, but the objection that I raised
I asked that you not interrupt. I asked you not to interrupt. I asked that you not to interrupt. Thank you. Go ahead, Shanna.
Right. So there's a couple of problems with that question, but I'll get right to what you want. I don't know, and I wouldn't claim to know.
Okay, then you can't invoke the laws of logic beyond just a mere temporary assumption.
Right, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Which Shannon, that was the thing I was telling you earlier. When you make arguments for deism, you are assuming the validity of the laws of logic, but as you just said right there, you can't account for them, so your arguments collapse.
Oh, they don't collapse until logic collapses, right? And then I have to be willing to allow that to happen, right? I can't if logic. No, hang on now. If logic collapses underneath my feet, and I no longer have the ground that I'm building to stand on, and it falls away, I have to allow the beliefs to fall away with it. Then I would be consistent.
But it did just collapse. You just said that you can't account for them.
That's exactly right.
By not being able to account for it with the deity does not collapse it. Logic has to itself fail.
No,
your claim that I'm not able to account for it in some godlike way, which I could throw that out there. We could have some fun with that, but I don't want to play with you.
Okay. Well, what Logical said earlier was a brilliant point. He said the only way that you could know that the laws of logic are absolute and universal is two ways. Either you are omniscient, or it was revealed to you by one who was omniscient that it was that case. Now, again, we're not talking about a temporary assumption that we all use even to open up our mouth and speak about things. That's not under question. The question is, how would you account for them from within your worldview beyond a temporary assumption? And the answer is, you cannot from within your, I believe did you say you were a deist, Shanna?
Yes, I am a deist.
Okay, good. From it within your worldview of deism entails that there is a God or a creator who does not intervene providentially nor give revelation. So there would be no way, given your finite limitations and the non-providential interjection or revelation of that deist God, there would be no way for you to know anything about the nature or character of that God, nor the parameters of existence such that the laws of logic would be universal.
But I raised an objection to that line of questioning, which hasn't been
I'd
answered.
like Shanna to respond to my question without being interrupted by Jack. By the way, Jack is a known troll who attempts to obstruct any conversations I'm in with people. Thank you. Go ahead, Shanna.
Go ahead with what? You just made a lot of statements, right? And you're not really saying anything that I disagree with. You and I just completely disagree on the value of knowledge and what you consider to be knowledge.
Well, the point is this. I'm going to ask you an if-then question, and I'll try to just keep it simple. If the Christian God exists as he is defined and described in the Bible, would it necessarily follow that we could know some things, such that the laws of logic are universal?
Ask it one more time. I got a kick out of your snark comment, so I didn't listen to the beginning. Try again.
Are you referring to Jack?
No, you said that you'll try and keep it simple. I thought that was cute.
Oh no, if that came across to you as snarky, I apologize. I did not mean for it to come across that way.
Oh, okay, good. Maybe I took it wrong.
No, I wasn't trying to be snarky. If the Christian God exists as he is defined and described, does it logically and necessarily follow that we could know things such as the laws of logic are universal? Well, the answer is yes.
I don't think so. I think the answer is still going to be no.
So
the answer would be yes, because the Christian God is defined in such a way that the way his mind works and his properties and attributes consist of the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. So by definition, it necessarily follows that we would know that the laws of logic are universal. It's by definition.
Shanna, could you give us a reason why the Christian God cannot account for the laws of logic? Can you give us a reason? Because we gave an argument.
Well,
for
it's
why
not so much. Okay, first of all, I want to make something a little clearer, and I'm not trying to be rude. That was the nicest word. I don't grant that presuppositionalism is a great argument. So when you say that you've given me an argument, I don't agree with you.
No, our argument is
for the sake of having conversation, because this is a lot of fun, and I enjoy that you guys are, having fun and being nice for the most part, and so let's just make sure that's clear. Next, I think that if it's revealed to you by an omniscient being, and he's defined in such a way where he knows everything, so on and so forth, there's a certain amount of trust that's put in that, right? You're trusting that that's true.
No.
And you're also assuming that this God won't lie to you or mislead you.
No. Shanna, a bachelor is an unmarried male. That is true by definition. Okay? The moment you say you're assuming that the God you believe in, i.e. the Christian God, could lie to you, well then that would contradict the definition. The Christian God, by definition, cannot lie.
Hey, Mr. Interrupty, why don't you not interrupt and let her finish her thought?
I didn't realize I was interrupting him. And by the way, my name is Evolution False, not Mr. Interrupty.
Oh, goodness. So,
Okay, Shannon. I mean, I thought you were done, but did you have something else that you wanted to say there?
I did, but I kind of lost it.
Well, I want to address.
I mean, if you have.
But Shannon, I want to address though what for example you said. For example, you said, well, how do we know that he isn't lying to us, right? That is one of the things that you mentioned, correct?
Right.
Okay, so how do we know that he isn't lying to us? Okay, well, first of all, the God that we presuppose, as Evolution Falls said, has told us that he does not lie. So by definition, the one we presuppose, but that's just one point. The second point would be is that to assume that lying is bad, that it is something that should not be done, and therefore we couldn't trust somebody, is to also assume the same God that makes that foundation of that moral claim makes that possible. So that actually it completely undermines your to ask the question would simply be to be pulling the rug out from underneath your own feet.
Right.
Because,
I don't know. I don't think that I agree with that. It says a couple times in the Bible specifically that God would send a powerful delusion and let them believe the lie.
Okay, that's
absolutely. That's completely different. Yeah. That's a category.
Well, then God is capable of.
No, the mistake. Okay, real quickly here. The 2 Thessalonians is
right 2:11, right?
Yeah, 2 Thessalonians. What that is referring to is God is not uttering that either something is false or something that he knows is false from his mouth. God is allowing providentially circumstances to coalesce, that when those circumstances are in conjunction with a rebellious mind, that the rebellious mind, the catalyst being the rebellious mind, becomes deceived. Whereas if there is no rebellious mind, there is no deception. So the second Thessalonians passage would not be a contradiction to the statement God cannot lie.
He's simply allowing, Shannon, what God is simply doing, he's simply allowing people to remain within their own willful deception. That's all it is.
It says that he will send upon them a powerful delusion.
That's correct. Now, are you familiar with, are you familiar with that? Within the Old and New Testament books, there are a number of statements where God is spoken of in using what we would call an idiomatic expression, and in this case, it would be referred to phenomenologically, as things appear. So, as in Hebraisms, it many times speaks of God doing when it is actually just referencing that the fact that God sits on high providentially, and he controls all circumstances except for the free moral decisions of free agents. Okay, so when it says God will send, it means God in his providential direction is allowing circumstances to coalesce, whereupon when they meet in conjunction with the rebellious mind, that rebellious mind becomes further deceived. So there is no deception on God's part.
That's interesting.
The deception is rooted and grounded within the nature of man himself. It's what he desires himself.
Right.
And so that's where the deception comes from. It does not come from the nature of God himself.
Can I just make one comment? I don't think Shanna was making a moral evaluation saying your God could lie. I think she was just saying that it could be the case that he's not telling the truth. So I don't think she was actually making a moral judgment. But the problem is this: the moment you invoke that, Shanna, you are altering the definition of the Christian God, and you are now talking about a different God.
Right, as defined by whom?
Right. So the point I'm trying to make
is that was a question. As defined by whom?
By how the Bible defines God.
There is another difficulty, though, Shannon. You have to assume that lying is something that is a problem, that it's bad, or that it's not good, and so therefore you have to assume the only way you can justify that particular assumption is to appeal to the God of the Bible. So
stop, pump your brakes. No. One, I don't think that lying is a bad thing. I think that sometimes it can be used in a horrific way, and sometimes it can be used in an extraordinarily beneficial way.
Well, in relation to God here, though, in relation to God, you said that if he did lie to us, or if he could lie to us. Maybe rephrase how you said it. But if he could lie to us, then how is it that we could trust him? In that case, you would say that that's a bad thing, right?
Well, not necessarily, right? Like, I omit things from my children on a regular basis because it's for their own good. Their little minds can't comprehend some of the things that I have to some of the things that I have to say or explain or what's going on in the world. I omit a lot. And there's times I'll even lie a little to my kids, and it is, in fact, for their own good. And certainly you don't think that your God, you could understand and comprehend every single thing he would have to tell you.
No, absolutely not.
All right. The point that I was trying to make is this, that it logically and necessarily follows that if the Christian God exists, then we would know things because it would be true by definition. That doesn't mean that you accept that that is the case, but it would be true by definition. For example, if I said to you, Bozo the Clown is defined by having big shoes and a red nose, right? And then it would necessarily follow by definition that Bozo the Clown has a red nose and big shoes. But you could turn around and say, well, what if that Bozo the Clown actually has a blue nose and it's, you misperceive? That's not the point of what we're saying. What we're saying is you have one worldview, that if that worldview, as it is defined and described, is the case, that is true, then we would know certain things, including that the laws of logic are universal. This is what is defined within the parameters of the Bible. It doesn't matter whether you agree that the Bible is true or the Word of God. Right? Now, if you reject that worldview, then you are in a state, whether you're a deist, skeptic, an atheist, where you cannot ascertain, you cannot account for the laws of logic. Therefore, any argument that you use to undergird, which would employ the laws of logic, is just basically incoherency.
Well, I wouldn't grant that it's an incoherency. Right?
Sure,
but I mean, I do see what you're saying earlier, before you said the thing about incoherent. I do see what you're saying there. But, I mean, I disagree, obviously, that it's necessary.
If I said to you, whenever we're using arguments with somebody, okay, let's say you and I are discussing something that takes place halfway around the world. Whenever we're speaking, and of course I'm speaking beyond just a mere temporary assumption, right? When we're speaking about something occurring, let's say, in the next town over or halfway around the world, we're invoking the principle of identity. We're invoking the principle of non-contradiction and excluded middle, right? Now, that cannot be justified universally. You cannot account that is the case. Now, one might argue, well, it might necessarily be the case, and I could grant that, but there would be no way for you to know that. Therefore, from a deist point of view, from a skeptic's point of view, from an atheist point of view, that any attempt to have an argumentation, logic, proof would collapse because there's no foundation of the laws of logic for them. None.
Well, I mean, that's not entirely true from a deistic standpoint, right? Well, it may be true for an atheistic standpoint. In some degrees, it's also wildly irrelevant, right? Because they don't have to account for it. That's just something you're asking of them. They don't actually have to account for it. But hang on. No. I let you interrupt me the last time. I'm not going to do it this time.
Okay.
So, from a deistic standpoint, though, because the universe, because I'm compelled by the arguments that I am, because I believe the arguments that I do, I also do have certain beliefs regarding the Creator. And I do believe that the Creator created the universe in the way that it meant to. And I believe that it's also functioning correctly. And I do believe that we are functioning correctly for the most part. At least we have the capacity to. So I do trust logic because I believe that this Creator made me with the ability, and all of us with the ability, to use it correctly.
Okay, what you just stated right there is you're telling us that you have a hunch. Doesn't matter whether you trust it or you believe it. There would be no way, given your worldview, for you to know that. You could surmise that the deist God that you believe in has certain properties, but there would be no way for you to ascertain that whatsoever. Any more than...
There's plenty of ways for me to ascertain it, which you mean, I think what you meant rather than ascertain was to know for sure.
Well,
Okay, other than speculating, you wouldn't be able to know anything about the deist God.
This was the question I asked.
Creating.
This is the question I asked you earlier, Shanna, when you posited deism, is you need to provide evidence and justification for your version of deism, other than your own subjectivity. And
I have nothing other than my own subjectivity.
Exactly. And that's actually our point.
Right.
No, actually, I appeal to Scripture, which is an objective source of truth outside of myself.
And that's where your assumption comes in, right? That's where the presupposition comes in.
That's correct,
Well,
but that makes sense of my world. That gives a cohesive, coherent worldview where I can justify the laws of logic. You're trying to justify it from your own subjective deity that you've constructed.
Okay. Shanna, do you believe that anything could be self-verifying?
That anything could be self-verifying?
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay, good. Then you are left in the state where you can't know anything, because your only other recourse would be an appeal to an infinite justification. Well, Christopher, I see you shaking your head there. Would you like to offer a counter to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Christopher.
So what am I responding to?
Well, you seemed amused by what I said. Did you have an objection to what I said?
Say it again.
You seem to be amused.
No. The thing that I responded to. Say that again, please.
Oh, I said to Shanna, do you believe that anything is or could be self-verifying? And she said no.
And then you said?
And I said all you're left then would be for an infinite regress of verification.
And you said it differently. You said you've given up knowledge, or...
That's true.
No, then you would be in a position to know anything.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Okay, good. Tell me why.
Do you think that I know things?
You know things by virtue of the fact that the Christian God exists and has created a world that is consistent with his nature.
I see that you see it that way. I don't.
Well, but Christopher, let's interact with. I just want to repeat the question, so because I don't think you're interacting with it.
I don't think he's really understanding what I said.
Yeah, let me repeat it. So, well, what he said is, do you believe there's anything self-verifying? And you said no. Well, then what you're left with is an infinite regression of verification that never stops anywhere. Well,
now let me just say
but that's a fetishization of verifying, right? This is
let me just say one thing.
Well, hold on a second. You asked me to answer your question, so now I'm going to do so. So that is the whole argument against the presuppositional apologetic from the atheistic perspective, is the overvaluing of justifications and validating and things like that. Within our worldview, we accept that knowledge exists provisionally, certainty exists on a continuum, and we are able to move forward and interact with reality without being able to account for the things that we experience, such as morality, ethics, and the laws of logic. So to take the extreme example and say that lacking that goes to an infinite regress of validity and we can't know anything, well, now you're using an idiosyncratic definition of what knowledge is, and if you use an idiosyncratic definition of anything, you can explain it as being or not being anything else.
Okay, well, we're not using the definition of the word "no" as the way you just employed. Now, a lot of times people misunderstand when we say you can't know anything. I'm sure that Andy and Logical and I certainly believe that Shanna and Christopher can know things, but that is only in virtue of due to the properties of the Christian God and how He's made the world. Now, we're using the word knowledge to mean something other than a belief or a strong belief. Now, you said you wanted to believe that knowledge is on a spectrum of certainty. We are not using the vocabulary in the same way.
Okay, so this taps into... I agree.
Okay, good. So the bottom line is this: from a skeptic's point of view, an atheist point of view, and including entirely a deist point of view, you cannot know anything in the manner and way that we are using the word "no." If you want to use the word "no" as mean to believe, then fine. You certainly believe things. But you're not in a position, you now no longer have a position to come to the table to argue about anything. And the reason why is because the foundation of all your reasoning is, well, I just assume it. I believe it.
No.
No. That's so incredibly wrong.
But Christopher, that is what you just said. You just said you assume all these things. You just listed a whole bunch of things that you just assume.
Is there anything that you were 100% certain about, Christopher?
No.
Okay, good.
So
Then what that means is you just have beliefs.
Hold on a second. So here's the language that you're using. So, and once again, this goes all the way back to what Jason and I discussed about an hour ago, where operational definitions, right? If you're going to dismiss everything that I say because I'm using the word knowledge differently than you, and then claiming that I can't have a discussion or I have nothing to bring to the table, I'm hearing some weird static. Stop it, microphone. Then that is merely an example of what Jason and I talked about earlier, which is that we're just using different definitions of knowledge, right? So and also the language that you're using, I just have beliefs, as if beliefs don't have any capital. I'm merely making assumptions, as if assumptions don't have any capital. Consistently, I'm not finished with my point. I just ramped up to it. So consistently within my worldview, the basal assumptions that I have, beliefs or knowledge is merely a collection of beliefs, and beliefs are assumptions. So obviously, that's why I agree that we have different definitions, but you're moving forward as though your definition is absolutely correct and mine's not, and that, once again, that violates my social contract on how to have a discussion. We can talk about why we have different definitions of knowledge, but to dismiss something because I don't adhere to your criteria of a definition, that's just, I don't know where to go forward with that for a discussion.
Well, most people, when you want to talk about social contract, I don't understand that cliche at all, but most people are using words as they're commonly understood. So when I'm using words, except on rare occasions, and unless I specify it, I'm using words that the average person, like for example, if I had $1 billion pennies at the Treasury, and one of them was marked black, and I reached in and I just randomly grabbed one in my hand, and I don't open it up and I can't see it, and I say to you, Christopher, this is an ordinary non-black penny. Do I know it or believe it?
I have no idea. That example kind of was a bit of a red herring. So
no, it's not a red herring because it illustrates.
But it is because let me explain why.
No, it's not a red herring. Go ahead.
Okay. I feel that it is a red herring because a moment ago you said that you're using the definition of knowledge in a very specific way. And then just now you said, when I use words, I'm using them like colloquially, like everyone else uses them. What I'm going to posit is that your definition of knowledge is probably different than mine. You may be using the Platonic definition of knowledge, justified true beliefs, and I am persuaded for the critiques of that, such that, and I think that Shannon and I share this, the concept of knowledge and the definition of knowledge is trivial and really not important to things, because once again, as much as you would like to show that my worldview is inconsistent or incoherent or absurd or whatever, I'm not interested in doing that to you. I'm more than happy to accept that we're using different definitions for terms, and so long as you're being a productive member of society, go with whatever the belief worldview system that you have.
Okay, good. So when I said I was using the word knowledge in a specific way, I was specifically using it in its ordinary sense. Not in an unordinary sense.
So now, could you tell me? Could you define that for me? Just, I mean, before we move on, I mean, please just lay out what you mean by knowledge.
Yeah, like, most people may not be able to formally articulate this, but they will believe that knowledge is something that is more than a mere true belief, or even a strong belief. That one is entirely justified in making a statement about a positive state of affairs, and it's not just a belief that is true that one may, let's say, have 98% certainty. Okay. Now the fact of the matter is, and the reason why my question about the pennies was not in fact a red herring, as you alluded to, is because it illustrates here a probabilistic scenario. So it doesn't even matter if it's 1 billion pennies. It could be 1 trillion pennies. If I reached in and I grabbed 1 penny, and only one out of the trillion pennies is black, and I grab one, and I hold it in my hand, can't see it, and I say to you, this is a normal non-black penny. Do I know it or do I believe it? So your definition of knowledge is just a statistical guess. That's all it is. You're not using the word knowledge that most people have as in certainty. You mean less than certain. So you are using the word knowledge in a non-standard way.
I'll throw it to you just in 1 second, Shannon. So
right.
What I said was knowledge is provisional and it is tethered to a level of certainty. And if you want to use the way that people use the word knowledge, it is used in such a variety of ways. And in philosophical circles, epistemology is a branch where knowledge is actively argued, right? I can say that I know my car is parked out front. My level of certainty is not as high as I know that I have a webcam in front of me. My certainty of the webcam is higher than the one about the car because I know I parked the car outside, but somebody could have broken in and taken it. So I can't have a high level of certainty of that. I know that there's ice cream in the freezer because I just ate a little bit. But I'm in a house filled with people who love ice cream. So the probability that that is true, my certainty of it, is a little bit lower than the fact that I have an empty coffee cup in front of me, right? That is a knowledge claim. I know this is a coffee cup, and my level of certainty is maximal because it's in my hand. My level of certainty of other knowledge claims is minimal.
Are you just admitting then that you can have what we would call certainty versus less than complete certainty?
Certainty. I can have maximal certainty. I can be maximally confident.
Are you saying that you can be certain of anything?
What do you mean by certainty? I just explained that I can have confidence.
Okay, we're not talking about a probabilistic belief.
But I am. So to take it out of the way that I'm using it is not the way that I'm using it.
Okay, maximal means less than 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So the bottom line is this: is every time you speak on an issue,
mm-hmm.
the foundation for everything you're saying is just a probabilistic statement.
Yeah, but you say just. So from your perspective, and I accept that you have this, anything less than 100% doesn't have the value that I'm giving it. To me, 95%, relatively speaking, has more value than 25% when it comes to certainty of knowledge claims. Okay. I accept that you don't see it that way, but I know that Shanna wanted to say something earlier, so I'd like to throw it to her.
I kind of forget what my point was. I should have wrote it down.
What are you doing?
I know,
he was talking about knowledge and certainty and...
Right.
Well, but I want to throw this back at you, Christopher. So
okay.
Are you 100% certain, or just probably certain? Are you 100% certain that you measure knowledge based upon a scale of maximal certainty?
I'm maximally certain of it.
You're just maximally certain of it, but you're not 100%.
Well, once again, you're using the word just as a rhetorical move to devalue the way that I'm using my terms. And I accept that because I accept that we don't agree about this.
It's not rhetorical. It's not rhetorical.
In fact, it is.
No, it isn't.
I'm maximally certain of it.
No, when you say it's rhetorical, you're basically trying to depreciate that. The fact of the matter, is all you're simply telling us, all you are simply telling us that you have maximal certainty is that you have a higher level of a probability of a guess.
Yes.
Good. Then we can dismiss everything you say.
If that's what you would like to do, you're more than welcome to do so, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm here to have a discussion. Jason wants to have a discussion with me. If he wants to dismiss everything that I'm saying, I wouldn't understand why he would invite me. He knows what my position is before I come here. If you want to dismiss everything I say, please don't talk to me.
No, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point is when I say I can dismiss the content, it does not entail that I'm being rude to you, nor that I'm not interested in hearing what you're saying. What I am saying is the content of what you're saying is just a probabilistic guess and nothing more.
Yes, and you don't value that. Is that a correct? Is that a correct assumption?
Quick question.
Why should I value it?
You don't have to. But well, hold on a second, Andrew. So I'm not saying that you have to value it.
Okay, so when you say
but
there's
hold
no
on a second.
God,
Please answer the question without answering it with a question, please.
Yeah, what's the question?
So does that have less value to you? The fact that my knowledge is probabilistically base?
I think it's not so much that it has less value. Is it you have nothing? What you say really isn't substantive in any way.
Does having substance have value?
I think to most people it would, and to God it does.
Does it to you?
Yes.
Okay, so it is of less value.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, I don't think.
Let me just say one more thing. So basically, all you're expressing in your response is everything is just a matter of taste. Then.
That's not the case. And if you would like my opinion about that, I'd be happy to answer a pointed question.
Okay, good. Is there anything that's objective in your worldview?
That is objective. Yes, there is an objective reality.
How do you know that?
Depends on what you mean by know. I know it provisionally.
Okay, so basically it's a probabilistic guess that something is objective.
It is a probabilistic assertion based on my assumptions and belief base, which forms my knowledge base.
But Christopher, that's self-refuting. To say that it's probably objective is not objective.
Yeah.
It's self-refuting maybe in a philosophical sense, but none of us here are professional philosophers. And as far as working through the reality of my experienced life, it serves me quite well.
Okay, good. When you say that it's objective, it would mean that it would be mind independent, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So when you say probable, means you're deriving a guess, which is a subjective evaluation. So he was correct when saying what you said is self-refuting.
No, you're flipping perspectives, right? I'm talking about my beliefs, and you're talking about things that exist outside of my beliefs. I'm not making.
Told me some things are objective.
Please don't interrupt. I was making a claim about my belief of things that are objective. So my probabilistic knowledge is about that belief. I wasn't making a claim that objective things do exist, and because it's not about that, you can't take my probabilistic and provisional understanding of knowledge and apply it to that thing. There's two different things that this is being framed as, and you're flip-flopping between the two. I'm talking about one, you're talking about another, and that's how I'm perceiving this conversation.
Hey, Andy, I want to give Andy, I think Andy wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm confused about something. So is there a difference between, this is a question for Christopher, 100% certainty and maximal certainty?
I'm not playing.
What's the difference between those two?
Max, 100%. Somebody's upset, Andy.
Sorry.
No, that's all good. It's all good. 100% certainty is absolute, right? As confident, for me, certainty is a variable that can be interchanged with confidence. I can have maximal confidence, but because I like to leave open the philosophical option that as many as possible as things are, they're always tethered to a probability. I always leave myself a little wiggle room. So think of it that way. So 100% certainty is 100%. Maximal certainty is 99.99999%. It's an asymptote that never reaches the 100.
So all you're simply telling yourself that all of your arguments, all of your reasonings are just guesses.
That's the fourth time you said that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
But you're saying just as a way that as what you accused me of doing when I said you're using it as a rhetorical move is what you're doing. By saying just guesses, that is devaluing it in some way. And the way that you're using guesses is a shorthand way of colloquially devaluing my understanding of assumptions, beliefs, and knowledge.
Okay, is it something more than a guess?
It is. Yes.
Good. Could you elucidate that for us, please?
It is an educated guess.
It's still a guess, right?
It is. What do you mean by guess?
A guess is a statement. It is your statement about a state of affairs that you don't know in the ordinary usage of the word know.
That I don't know. I'll answer it like this. I have models within which I work in reality, and they are based on assumptions, which could be called guesses. I'm going to embrace your use of the term guess. Yes, it's a guess. And my guesses have value in a way that they don't for you.
Okay, good. Since you said that you don't believe in God because there's no evidence, why should we believe in your beliefs even though you say they're maximal when you can't provide evidence in an ordinary sense of knowing things?
You shouldn't.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and this is ultimately goes back to Christopher. I had asked you this question the last time we had this discussion. Is, you know, from your position, my question is I know that you show up at these discussions, but the question would be is why?
I'm interested in the individual differences of how people think and why.
But if yours is just based upon guesses, you know, who cares? The other people's are just guesses also, I guess, according to you. And I would say that you would say, let me ask you this question. Are you saying that your worldview is actually a reflection of reality and that I live in that same worldview and that my stuff is just as much provisional guesses as yours is? Is that what you would say?
My understanding of human nature and psychology would direct me to say yes.
Okay,
as
so
humans, and to answer your previous question, why? Because I think that individual differences and how people believe and why are interesting, and they motivate me to go towards these discussions.
Why would you come to these discussions though if we're just all basing it upon guesses? None of us have objective reasons for why we believe what we believe. So if we're just all guessing, why even have discussions?
Because the individual differences are interesting.
So that's the only reason. There's no reason to engage in logical argumentation, to try to discover objective truth. It's just it's because it's a fun social event.
Okay, Christopher, would you say all conclusions about reality are only guesses?
Human conclusions, yes.
Okay, is that statement just a guess too?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the point is this: then whatever content you present to us, we can't be certain about anything you say, and since there's no certainty, there's not really a reason for us to believe in it. Just like when you say you don't believe in God because there's an absence of evidence, there's an absence of certainty. So there's not really any substantive reason why we should believe anything you say, given the foundation of your worldview.
Okay, so once again, we're talking about the difference between making claims outside of my skin and making claims about my beliefs. What you can assume is that I am certain that I believe what I believe.
Well, you mean certainty. You mean
maximal certainty.
Yes. Yeah.
Certainty along a scale. I have a degree of certainty based on specific knowledge claim.
You don't believe in the existence of certainty in the normal usage of the word.
I don't know what you claim as normal use.
Well, certainty would mean where
100%.
You believe something and it's entirely justified to be objectively true. So when you say
objectively true, well, hold on a second. That's not a certainty. That is a certitude. Right? Certainty is just my confidence about my beliefs.
That's correct. That is correct.
But you just use the word objective in defining certainty.
Right.
Well, if something would be a certitude, it would then also be objectively true, because a certitude would apply to all subjective beings.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about certainty. Hold on a second. Yeah. So if something is a certitude, you can be certain about it. But that does not mean that certainties lead to certitudes.
Well, in your worldview, there couldn't be any certitude.
Or certainty.
You just admitted that.
I don't know how...
In absolute terms, you're correct.
Okay, good. So when you say certainty, you don't mean the word certainty as is normally used by people. You're using it in a proprietary sense.
No. I mean, yeah. I don't think that you. Well, first of all, I don't think that you get to be the arbiter of what most people think. The people that I talk to use the word certainty the way that I'm using it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm not talking about cliques of skeptics. I'm talking about ordinary people on the street that you would run in for.
I don't see you as an authority that gets to dictate that.
No, I'm not an authority. I'm simply talking about the common usage. So I'm not claiming to be an authority.
But in order to make that claim about common usage, you would have to know everybody to understand.
Okay, and is what you just said a guess?
It's my understanding.
But Christopher, I want to jump in here. I don't think that you live your life as if things are just guesses. When you go to work and you interact with other scientists in your lab, you guys aren't just going, well, these are just you don't live your life as if everything is simply just a guess, and that's just his guess, and this is my guess. If that's the case, why even have governments? Why even have governments to even have discussions and come up with laws? This only makes sense within a Christian worldview. From your worldview that everything is just a subjective guess, you have your guess, I have my guess. Who cares? Who cares what anyone else does? Why even work together? Why even develop governments? Why even develop laws of to govern a society? Well,
I need you to ask me a more pointed question, because at first you said that I don't live my life according to certainty, and then you brought up why are there governments, and I'm not really seeing the connection between the two.
Okay, so I say that you don't live your life as if everything is just a subjective guess.
Why? Let's unpack that. Why don't I?
Okay. Well, you actually go to work and you interact with people and you have conversations as if there are objective truths.
Why is that? Where does the objective truth part come in?
Okay. Somebody else makes an argument and you go, oh, okay, well...
And that argument is their guess.
Exactly. And it's just their own subjective guess. So why should you entertain it? Why should they entertain your guesses?
Because from my past experience, I realize that there are threads of continuity between the individuals I interact with, such that we can make assumptions that we have a meeting of the minds about a majority of how life works. Within that majority of how life works, there are different ideas and individual differences, and they get discussed.
Okay, but there's no connection point anymore between other subjective individuals, because they just have their guesses, you have yours. There's no interaction point because there's no shared objective reality.
Now let's keep in mind Let's keep in mind that the way that you're using guesses, I define them as assumptions, which are beliefs, which form knowledge, right? So you keep hammering the word guess. They're just guesses. They're just guesses. They're just guesses. From my perspective, it's yes, those guesses are the assumptions that form knowledge and beliefs.
Do you have
knowledge that I'm not?
But they're just yours.
Hold on a second. Right? They're not just mine. The people that I interact with have similar values and goals to mine, and that allows us to all move forward.
Well, they might be common, but they're just subjective. Yeah, they might be common between you and other subjective individuals, but that's just their subjective, guess also about how reality should be.
Exactly.
You have no position anymore in order to even interact with, even if they agree with you. You have no you have no objective reality, because all you have is your own.
You just jumped the shark, because I have subjective individual differences from others that have subjective individual differences. We can't interact. I need you to.
There is no. Yeah, I'll build that out a little bit more. If all we are is subjective and we have no objective reality of which we interact with one another in, if there is no, then there is no connection point.
I think there is an objective reality.
I mean, how do you even? Oh, there is an objective reality. Is that something that is, once again, I think it's self-refuting to say that it is. What was your term that you used? It was probably objective, I think was the term that you used.
No, I said that
maximally certain.
I was maximally certain in my belief of an objective reality, right? So maximal certainty applies to. I'm not done. Applies to my belief, not about objective reality or the existence of it.
But that's just your guess. You don't know if that's actually.
It is a basal assumption of mine. It is a presupposition that there is an objective reality.
Okay, so you believe things without evidence?
Some of them depends on what you mean by evidence.
Okay. Well, how could you have actual evidence in the normal usage of the word if everything is subjective? How could anything in the ordinary, normal sense of the word evidence?
Models are based on assumptions, and those are presuppositions.
Okay, so you believe things for which there is no evidence for.
For which it depends on what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, in the normal usage of the word evidence, okay, you have no evidence for the things that you believe in.
For what?
For anything you believe in.
For anything that I believe in.
You have no evidence.
You're painting in broad strokes right now.
No, let me repeat what I'm saying. Okay. Let me repeat it, and then you can comment. Okay. under the normal usage, the way ordinary people use the word evidence, you have no evidence foundationally for the things that you believe in.
That doesn't make any sense.
It does make sense.
No, listen. Okay. First of all, you don't have to be so aggressive. Calm down. Okay.
No,
Second,
that's just the way
instead of saying, yes, it does make sense. Maybe you could explain exactly what it is that you mean and why you think it makes sense. I'm not a 5-year-old, and neither's Chris.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking down to anybody, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you don't like the tone of my voice. That is just the manner in which I speak. Now, when he says he doesn't believe in God, he says so because there's no evidence. But then he has all of these beliefs, and he's inconsistent with his principle.
Well, no,
because under the ordinary, you asked me not to interrupt you.
Oh, please. Overlapping conversation is a natural.
You have a double standard. You see, you request that I not interrupt you or interject, and yet you feel free to do the same to me. That's what we call a double standard. So I'd like to finish what I was saying.
I'm sure you would, but you keep making the claim.
No, I'd like to finish without being interrupted. I'd like to finish.
You made a
I'd
claim
like to
that
finish
wasn't
without being interrupted.
Okay.
I'd like to finish without being interrupted.
You made a claim about me that isn't true.
I'd like to finish without being interrupted.
Okay, everybody. Okay, hold on.
You see, you have a double standard.
Actually, just hold on. Everybody stop. Okay. So, Christopher, let's hold on to that thread of conversation. But you said that there was something that wasn't true, Christopher. What is it?
Yeah, this is one of multiple times that evolution claimed that the I don't believe in God because of evidences, and that is after I already admitted that evidences aren't an important factor. I don't believe in God because of the personal revelation that I didn't have. I don't really consider that an evidence. I consider that an experience. And it seems to be a trope that he likes to pull out to make a larger point. And if the thing he's basing it on isn't true, I question the validity of the larger point upon which he's going to make.
Okay. I'll let evolution respond.
I'd like to respond to that. Earlier, I asked Christopher, I said, you're an atheist. He said, yes. And I asked him to define atheism. And he basically said that his atheism was propositional, that there is no God. And I said, could you give me one good reason that there is not a God? Now, usually people step forward with their best position. And he said, well, there's no evidence for God. Now he's changing his tune. That he's depreciating the idea that he asserts that there is no God, not because there's no evidence, but because he hasn't been given revelation. So now he's flip-flopping on his main reason of not believing in God.
Can I reply? Go ahead. Okay. So I'm being completely consistent. I may have been inarticulate in the way that I was answering your questions, but the way I was answering your questions were based on the way you framed your questions. I'm on the record over the past several years of answering the question of why I don't believe in God or what would make me believe in God as having the personal revelation and subjective experience that would change the way I see things. Once that change had occurred, the things that I don't see as evidence now would be seen as evidence then. So that's why, that is the crucial reason why the evidences argument isn't really something that I consider of value. You're absolutely right. I gave the answer that you're claiming that I gave. The reason why I'm not interested in talking about evidences or providing you evidence or a good argument for the evidence argument, I don't think that I don't think it has traction because I don't have the belief. The belief is the starting point. The perception follows from that, and the evidences are what are perceived based on belief. I lack that belief.
No, it's not that you merely lack belief. You told us earlier that you asserted there was no God. So that was a propositional claim, not a mere state of mind where you lacked a positive affirmation due to insufficiency of reasons.
Very good. So I was inarticulate right there. It's not just that I lack that belief. I have a belief that there is no God, but it is not based on an evidence argument.
Well, that was the first answer that you gave me. I said, could you give me one good reason why you assert there is no God? And you said, because there's no evidence.
Okay, I'm gonna tie this up real quick.
You retracted that. Christopher retracted that.
Okay, well that's good.
He did. He just retracted that. I'm correct, Christopher. You did.
Yes, I was answering your questions based on the way you framed the questions.
Okay, so you assert that there is no God because you haven't received revelation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Why would that logically and necessarily follow?
It doesn't have to not logically follow. You can't be reasoned into religion from my perspective.
No, I didn't say religion, I said God.
Okay, yeah, you can't be reasoned into supernatural from my perspective.
Okay, so basically what you're telling us, you assert there is no God, but that your reason does not logically necessarily follow.
Logically, nope. I think that is fetishizing philosophy and logic to have that as the only way to get towards the existence or non-existence of a God.
So there is no God, according to you, because
no. Once again,
can I finish, please, without being
interrupted? You just made
well. Let him correct. He does say, I think you took on a more agnostic position, Christopher. I believe.
Actually, it's called flip-flopping.
Name calling. What planet?
No, it's not name calling. I didn't call your name. I said you're flip-flopping. I'm talking about what you're doing.
Very good. So you are talking about me making a claim about something that does or doesn't exist. And what I'm doing, and this is at least the 5th time that I've said this, what I'm doing is talking about my beliefs. I have a belief that there is no God.
Okay,
so
now
address my belief.
Okay, good. Well, I'm addressing your propositional claim. I asked you earlier when we started the conversation. I says, does your atheism entail propositional content? And you said, yes, there is no God. So you went on beyond merely telling us that your atheism was a state of mind or merely the absence of a positive belief. So does your atheism entail a propositional content, Christopher?
My atheism is the belief that there is no God.
Okay, good. That's a mere state. Does your belief have?
You are falling over your tongue trying to find a way to corner me based on my very clear.
I'm trying to articulate. No, what I'm trying to do is to articulate something that you won't twist. Now, I'm asking you. Does your state of mind represent propositional content?
I have no idea. I would have to think about those words in order to give you a...
Earlier when I asked you, are you asserting that there is no God, you said yes. Do you now assert that there is no God?
Everything that comes out of my mouth is my opinion based on my beliefs. I believe that there is no God.
Okay.
I don't know how to be more clear about it. I'm not making a claim that there is no God. I am making the claim that I have a belief that there is no God. Do you understand the difference between them?
That's a distinction with no difference.
Well, that's a distinction with a significant difference.
No,
saying what you believe to be true, is a statement of the belief, right? Which is what a proposition is. It's in philosophy, which you know, it is essentially what you believe to be true, right? Now, forwarding an argument to argue for the fact of the matter is significantly different than stating what it is that we believe is the fact of the matter.
Well, let me ask you this question, Christopher. Does your belief apply to me also? So, in other words, let me clarify before you answer this. But you say that you believe there is no God. So, does that apply to me too? Do I also live in a reality where there is no God?
I can't think for you. Right?
No.
Well, hold on a second. That's part one of my answer. Part two is my understanding of reality is such that because I have a belief that God doesn't exist, that my explanation for your belief that he does exist is explained by my understanding of psychology and my experiences and the theories about the things that we're talking about, the metaphysical things, the morality, laws of logic, ethics, that resonate with me.
Well, I'm not talking about, yes, I know that we have different beliefs, Christopher. What I'm saying is you say you believe there is no God. So if we exist in the same reality, do you believe we exist in the same objective reality? You told me earlier you believed in objective reality, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So my understanding of reality is that there is no God.
Okay. So then if we both live in the same reality, and you said your understanding of reality is there is no God, then in my reality there also is no God.
I'm not making a claim about objective reality, right? So to put it in most blunt terms, I think that I'm right and you're wrong. That doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong. I am compelled by my opinion, like all humans.
Okay, but I heard two different things. I heard you say earlier that it did apply to reality. There is no God, and now just a little bit ago
that is not my position.
Okay, so in reality, God does exist?
In objective reality, God could exist.
Okay, so that's an agnostic position. So you don't know. He could possibly exist in objective reality.
I don't know that God exists. That God doesn't exist.
Okay, good. Then you're not an atheist under the standard definition.
I've said this several times in this conversation. Labels are unimportant to me. My definition of atheism could be another person's definition of agnosticism. It doesn't bother. It doesn't hurt my feelings to not be called.
So do you think we should be in a conversation use words any which way we want, or should we be using English words as they are usually used?
Well,
I think that there should be operational definitions and a meeting of the mind on those definitions for a discussion to move forward.
And I want to actually go to the thing about words, because Christopher, you're often asking us to define the different words that we're using when we're using them in the common usage. Do you believe words actually have an objective meaning that we can actually have conversations with, or you don't?
That would be denotative. The meaning of words are conventional. Okay, so basically what you're telling me is the manner in which you are using and defining atheism is it is a state of mind where you don't affirm the existence of God due to the insufficiency of reasons. You neither affirm nor deny, right?
Man, you're using. I don't understand what's not clear about. I have a belief that God doesn't exist. It seems like everything. All of your questions seem like they're asked in bad faith for a setup to something I already know is going to happen, which is you're going to say that I have nothing to contribute and no content. And no matter how many times you say it, because you've said it several times, I will reply with, that doesn't matter to me.
Okay. So there are three basic positions that one can take on the existence of something, or God for that matter.
According to whom?
Affirm. Okay. According to logic and reason.
And you're the arbiter of what is logical and reasonable.
Okay. And are you?
No, but I don't take the stance. I don't take the stance of the student. Hold on a second. You asked me a question.
Well, you interrupted me. You interrupted me at mid-sentence.
I'm trying to figure out where you're getting the. See, what's happening is your turn. Hold on, just let me. I'll make 2 seconds. It seems like you are putting yourself in a position of an educator, and I am the student, and I do not accept those terms.
Okay, good. I'm going to basically put forward here three basic positions. If you feel that this is a false trichotomy, you're welcome to introduce a fourth position. Okay?
Okay. I like the way you just phrased that. I like the way you just phrased that.
I didn't even need to say that, but I'll move on. There are three basic positions that one could have toward the existence of anything or God. One would be to affirm the existence. Mm-hmm. The other one would be to deny that. Mm-hmm. Or one where one is in a state of ignorance and not knowing with absolute certainty or not. Which of those three positions do you take on the existence of God? Do you affirm, deny, or are you in an area where you do not know?
It depends on what you mean by those words. I guess because I have a belief that God doesn't exist, I could be denying it. But in other ways of using the word deny, it means that you're going against something that is true. So, I mean, I guess I'll put myself on the third option.
Okay, good. So basically, what we've seen here today, starting with the beginning of the conversation with Christopher now, what he has flip-flopped from making a propositional statement that there is no God by virtue of the fact that there was no evidence. Now he's taking the agnostic position. So he's flip-flopping between the affirmation there is no God to I don't know.
That's not even close to what happened at all.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I accept that you
believe that. I'm about to respectfully disagree as well.
I accept that you believe that, Shanna.
Excellent. That's wonderful language to use. That helps the conversation move forward.
Yeah, I just thought I would throw that little silly cliche in there for humor.
Silly.
Yes, I do think it's silly.
This is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So Chris can have the belief that there is no God, and then when you press him and question him about whether or not he knows that, and then he answers that, it doesn't then make him an agnostic. It means he's answering the questions that you have pointedly asked to a degree about knowledge.
I didn't say that. I said, Christopher, do you affirm, deny, or do you take the position that you don't know?
Right, and the way that you use
I asked him what he affirmed.
Knowledge. Right.
And it depends, however you want to put it, right? I have a belief that God doesn't exist. Whatever of those three categories you would like to place it in, place it in.
It's really not a difficult question. Is there a fourth option? No, I don't think so. So basically, you're saying I don't know, right?
Basically, yes. I'm saying that I don't know whether God exists, but I think there is a high probability that he doesn't. And therefore, I'm going to let that assumption lead to my belief that there is no God.
Okay, that's double talk. You just contradicted yourself.
I know that you think it's double talk because you have these
practiced. I know that you
have these practiced ways of asking questions because you have a very savvy. You're a smart cat. You're the Taylor ham guy, if I remember correctly. I had a conversation with you about Taylor ham and pork roll. I just recognized your voice from a while ago.
That's a good. You have a good memory.
You like that? You're Jersey boy.
That's where I'm originally. That's where I was raised.
Yeah. So I mean, you're a smart cat, and you have a way of understanding philosophy that allows you to make the arguments that you want to make. I'm not interested in arguing, right? Your goals seem to be very different from mine, and that seems to be where you're seeing that I'm flip-flopping or whatever. I consider this a casual conversation, and you're holding me to answers that I gave that were off the cuff, potentially inarticulate, and even if they weren't, I reserve the right to change my mind. You might call it flip-flopping, and that might earn points for you for people that believe what you believe, but that is not the conversation I'm interested in, right? And you've been doing all the question asking. I would like to know why you have the beliefs that you believe, what beliefs you do have, and also, without being asked these weird questions, without being told that I'm using silly rhetorical moves or anything like that. I mean, the bottom line is you very much want to show how wrong I am. I'm not interested in reciprocating that to you. So we're talking past each other.
Well, I see that you're rather defensive, and usually this is the problem.
That's a bold assertion. I'm setting boundaries.
I accept that you believe that that's a bold assertion. How do you like that cliche? Is that a good cliche? Good.
If you want to call it a cliche,
I like that. I like using smarmy cliches. So
smart.
Bottom line is, okay,
you seem defensive right now.
No, I'm not. I'm the same that I always am.
What?
Okay?
You don't accept that I believe that?
No, I'm just being smarmy, just like you were throughout the conversation.
Smarmy.
Yeah, smarmy. I think that's a very good word to use.
Yeah,
And so anyway, where we were. So the point is this, is when atheists, in my experience, as in your case here that in questioning, when they get confronted with their own incoherencies and inconsistencies and even flip-flopping, they want to turn the tables by making the person who's posing the question about the substance and validity of their atheism as the bad guy, where what you just pulled was a kind of like an ad hominem psychoanalysis on me, trying to suggest what my motives are. The bottom line is this: you affirmed a propositional statement that there is no God. Then upon questioning of your position, there were no unfair or gotcha questions. You became incoherent.
I accept that you believe
and you were flipping. You can stop with your little smarmy cliches. I'm not some 15-year-old.
You sound defensive.
No, I'm not defensive at all. But you see, in a conversation / debate like this
is not a debate.
You can continue with your smarmy remarks with "I accept that you believe." In fact, you use that quite a bit.
I do, because I do
Good.
accept that you believe these things.
Okay, good. Then
That's the crux of what I'm saying.
good.
We're here
Good.
to
And
discuss why we believe what we believe.
It's almost an unnecessary thing for you to say.
I'm acknowledging what you're saying.
Okay, good. It's a diversionary tactic. Anyway, the point is this: you started your atheism, and I asked you to define it.
You're going to walk us through this
to give a good
again.
reason. Excuse me for talking while you were interrupting.
I think that you think that.
Excuse me for talking while you were interrupting. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you. Obviously, you have an agenda. You want to interrogate me, right? How does that taste? How does that taste? Do you like getting some of your own medicine?
Oh yeah.
Good. Good, because I can use your own cliches against you as well. So I'd like to finish without being interrupted.
Go ahead.
Good.
Okay, I'm going to end this conversation here in about 10 minutes. So.
Okay, good. So what I want to just say in wrapping up is Christopher started out by his own words, no trick questions, low questions, that he was asserting that there was no God. Now what he's done is he has flip-flopped to going back to just saying, well, I believe, and then he says, well, I don't know. So now he's flip-flopped to what we would call agnosticism, which is an acknowledgement of ignorance. But prior, he wasn't making a statement of ignorance. He says there is no God because there's no evidence. So you see, this is what happens when you question atheists once they've made a propositional claim that there is no God, and you question them in terms of their reasoning with fair and pointed questions, they completely flip-flop and turn into agnostics. And I'm done.
Okay. You overvalue how smart and important your line of questioning is. Okay.
All righty. Well, thank you all for joining in today. Andrew, did you have anything final you wanted to say before we wrap up the conversation?
No. Did you want to call this the hangout, or did you want to do another hangout? I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, what I wanted to do with you is I want to do a hangout where we just talk more about science, and it'll just be you and I. So we'll maybe shoot for that next week. So I think you had said you wanted to prepare a few things for that. So if you still want to do that, this would not be this will just be one where just you and I just talk. We're not going to have anybody else come in. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Okay. Well, we'll plan on that. So, hey, thank you, Christopher, for coming on.
No
thank
doubt.
you, Evolution. What False?
Yes.
Evolution False for jumping
Thank you,
in.
Lodge.
And
Thank you, Lodge.
yeah, no problem. And Shanna, Christopher, thank your girlfriend for jumping in. We've had some lively discussions.
Yeah. Hey, Logical. Are
yeah.
you going to go off air momentarily?
Yeah, in just a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'd just like to chat for a few minutes with you off air. If that's okay with you.
No, that's no problem.
Sure.
All righty. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast there, and this will be available on the podcast also. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. I appreciate it.